Chapter 46-34. Lai Yin Jiufeng's question surprised Nie Tian. He was a little confused. Why would Lai Yin Jiufeng ask him who he had been in contact with recently? Don't be nervous. I just sensed an interesting aura from you, so I asked out of curiosity. Lai Yin Jiufeng smiled calmly and said indifferently. No comment. Nie Tian frowned and responded coldly. Lai Yin Jiufeng smiled and did not pursue the matter. Wan Minghai soon returned to the hall. He brought Mo Rushi, Qing Qi, and the others with him. Nie Tian. Mo Rushi was very excited to see Nie Tian again, but she did not show it in front of so many people. She only restrained herself and called out to him. Nie Tian quickly walked up and pulled Mo Rushi into his arms. He said softly, I'm sorry, I did not protect you well. Mo Rushi's eyes heated up. She could no longer hold back her tears, and they fell down her cheeks. When the others saw this scene, they turned around one after another. A moment later, when Mo Rushi had calmed down, Nie Tian let go of her. Then, Nie Tian briefly told Qing Qi and Mo Rushi what had happened. He also told them about using the Heaven's Mystery Body Art to save Nie Fan. Mo Rushi did not know what the Heaven's Mystery Body Art was, but she believed in Nie Tian's decision. Qing Qi understood immediately. He also felt that the Heaven's Mystery Body Art had a high chance of saving Nie Fan. Without wasting any more time, the crowd left immediately. About half a day later, Nie Tian and the others returned to the Fengtian sect. After a discussion, they decided to stay at the Fengtian sect for a night and return to the All-Heaven Sacred World the next day. Nie Tian planned to go to Gaoyu village first and bring Gao Jin with him. Because Gao Jin had the 3 Malice Immortal root, he was seen as a person who would bring disaster to the world. In order to protect him from danger, Nie Tian wanted to bring him to the All-Heaven Sacred World. The next day, Nie Tian prepared everything and immediately left the Fengtian sect. The journey was extremely smooth. They arrived at the Fengtian sect in the All-Heaven Saints world very soon. Everyone was in a good mood when they returned to the Fengtian sect. Ling Shuang Wuchen also removed the Yama King's coffin, but he was seriously injured and would need to rest for a while. Devil's Knight had successfully obtained the bloodline of the ancient Holy Venerate from Wan Minghai. Nie Tian was very curious. Devil's Knight said that he would use the ancient Holy Venerable's bloodline to save someone. Who did he want to save? The crisis of the Fengtian sect was temporarily suppressed. Because Nie Tian was worried about Nie Fan's situation, he decided to explain the situation to Gu Ling Wuji and then immediately go to the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm. As for the gentleman's agreement with Devil's Knight, he could only postpone it for the time being. As for Devil's Knight, he didn't even return to the Fengtian sect. He seemed to be in a hurry about something and left in a hurry. Gu Ling Wuji was in charge of managing the Fengtian sect while Qing Qi stayed behind to help him. 3 days later, in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, several figures flew across the sky at an extremely fast speed. They were Nie Tian and the others. Holy Venerable, the city in front is Yunluo City. Let's take a rest in the city first before going to Heavenly Martial City, said Nie Tian as he pointed at a huge city in the distance. They had been traveling day and night for the past few days. They were indeed tired and needed a rest. Mo Rushi and Gao Jin were placed in the 9 superbs by Nie Tian, so they were very relaxed. The Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm is much bigger than the Immortal Qi continent. The Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm is just a high-level sacred realm, but a random city here is so magnificent. It's really amazing. It was Wan Minghai's first time in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm. What he saw and heard along the way shocked him. Previously, he had learned from ancient books that there was a wider world outside the Immortal Qi continent, but he didn't expect the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm to be so big. It completely overturned his understanding. Yunluo City is not a super city in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, but it is extremely prosperous and can be called a first-class city. Nie Tian smiled and said, Yunluo City is built to the north of Heavenly Martial City. It's a front tooth of Heavenly Martial City. Before coming to the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, Nye Tian had already learned about the situation of Heavenly Martial City. Nye Fan was at the Crimson Life Danhart, which meant that he was in the Heavenly Martial Association. The Heavenly Martial Association was located in Heavenly Martial City and was a first-class force in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm. Heavenly Martial City was the core city of the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm. Almost all the major forces in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm were located there. Nye Tian had already arrived at Yunluo City. He was only 2,000 miles away from Heavenly Martial City. Thinking that he was going to see his son soon, Nye Tian felt an inexplicable excitement and nervousness. Soon, Nye Tian and Wan Minghai landed in Yunluo City. After passing through the gate, they entered the city. The atmosphere of the All-Heaven Sacred Realm is indeed different from that of the Immortal Qi continent. It's a worthwhile trip, Wan Minghai sighed as he looked at the wide streets and magnificent buildings around him. If he had known that the All-Heaven Sacred Realm was like this, he would have found a way to see it no matter what. But now it was not too late. Holy Senior, let's go into the restaurant and have a look. Seeing that Wan Minghai was in a good mood, Nye Tian decided to stay for a while to recover his strength. Okay. Wan Minghai naturally agreed and happily followed Nye Tian into a big restaurant. In the restaurant, it was crowded and noisy. Nye Tian found a slightly remote place and sat down with Wan Minghai. They ordered some food and wine. Soon, the food and wine were served. Wan Minghai looked at the food on the table, but his eyes were fixed on the jar of wine. With a faint smile, Nye Tian picked up 2 bowls and filled them up himself. Lord Holy Senior, please. Nye Tian picked up the bowl of wine and drank it in one gulp. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he drank to his heart's content. Seeing that Nye Tian had finished drinking, Wan Minghai also picked up his bowl and drank it. Then, his eyes widened and he looked at Nye Tian in surprise. What is this? Why is it so spicy? Nye Tian frowned. Lord Holy Senior, you've never drunk wine before? Wine. Wan Minghai was also stunned. He picked up the jar and looked at it. What is wine? This time, Nye Tian was even more stunned. Could it be that there was no wine in the Immortal Qi continent? Nye Tian asked briefly and found that there really was no wine in the Immortal Qi continent. It was hard to imagine that the vast Immortal Qi continent had something like cloud gold mechas, but there was no wine. Wine is delicious. Wan Minghai had never drunk wine before, but he was immediately addicted. He grabbed the jar and drank it. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help feeling pity for Wan Minghai. Then, Nye Tian ordered a few more jars of wine, but Wan Minghai drank them all by himself. Half an hour later, Wan Minghai lay motionless on the table like a puddle of mud. A 6th-stage celestial venerate drunk? Nye Tian curled his lips in disbelief. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that a supreme powerhouse of the Immortal Qi continent could fall to a few jars of wine. Chapter 46-35. Nye Tian looked at Wan Minghai, who was lying on the table, and did not know whether to laugh or cry. If the people from the heaven-punishing church saw this, who knew how they would look at this saint in the future? Seeing that Wan Minghai was sleeping like a log, Nye Tian thought about how he was going to arrive at Heaven Martial City soon and was not in a hurry, so he started eating slowly. He could not help but sigh when he recalled how he had come to the saint's world for the first time and how far he had come. Only he knew the hardships he had faced along the way. Half an hour later, Nye Tian saw that it was about time and prepared to wake Wan Minghai up. However, at that moment, a few burly cultivators walked over and sat on Nye Tian's table without saying a word. Nye Tian glanced at them and couldn't help but frown. Before Nye Tian could speak, one of them glanced at him cold and growled, "Scram?" Nye Tian frowned, but he did not want to cause any trouble. Since he was going to leave anyway, he might as well leave. However, at that moment, another person suddenly looked at Wan Minghai, who was still lying on the table, and kicked him. Bang! In the next moment, before that person's foot landed, a layer of white light suddenly surged out of Wan Minghai's body and forcefully sent that person flying. What's going on? The others were stunned by the scene. They had no idea what was going on. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He looked at them as if they were idiot. No matter what, Wan Minghai was a level 6 immortal venerable. His strength was unfathomable, and he was probably on par with the peak experts of the saints' world. These small fries only had the cultivation of Saint Tianyi, yet they dared to provoke Wan Minghai. They were courting death. Go to hell. Following that, the man who was sent flying crawled back up. Even though he was not injured, he was extremely furious. With a low roar, he sent a punch flying toward Wan Minghai. Earlier, he had only kicked him casually. He did not expect Wan Minghai to be so strong. This time, he didn't hold back in this punch. Even if he didn't use his origin power, it was enough to split a mountain. Bang! However, as his punch landed, before it could even touch Wan Minghai, it was as if he had punched an extremely thick iron plate. A terrifying force rebounded and sent him flying out of the restaurant. At this moment, the others were completely stunned. They all sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Wan Minghai with horror. They were people who had seen some of the world, but they had never encountered such a situation. A person who was clearly asleep, how could the power in his body seem to be spontaneous? At this moment, the huge commotion attracted the attention of the people around them. They all looked at those people with a strange look in their eyes. What are you looking at? We are from the Three Extremes sect. Do you all want to die? One of them had a fiery temper. Clearly, he was annoyed by the gazes of the surrounding crowd. He roared violently. At the mention of the Three Extremes sect, everyone's expressions couldn't help but change, and they even instinctively retreated. So they are from the Three Extremes sect. No wonder they are so arrogant. The Three Extremes sect is one of the strongest sects in the heavenly martial sacred world. I didn't expect their disciples to be so ruthless and overbearing. But look at the person who is sleeping. He seems to be quite powerful. These guys from the Three Extremes sect have kicked an iron plate this time. The crowd was discussing in a low voice. Obviously, they had also noticed what had just happened. Nie Tian frowned. He didn't care about the Three Extremes sect or the Four Extremes sect. He just didn't want to cause any unnecessary trouble. At this moment, Wan Minghai finally woke up. He looked drowsy. Seeing so many people looking at him, he looked at Nie Tian confusedly and said, Nie Tian, what happened? Just then, he had only instinctively protected himself. He didn't know that he had hit an idiot out of the restaurant. It's nothing. Let's go. Nie Tian smiled indifferently. He didn't want to stay here any longer, so he prepared to leave. Oh good. Wan Minghai stood up and the two of them prepared to leave. Stop. However, at this moment, the hot-tempered martial artist from the Three Extremes sect shouted and extended his hand to stop Nie Tian and Wan Minghai. Move aside. Nie Tian really didn't want to waste time with a bunch of idiots. His eyes darkened and he released a murderous aura. He spoke in a cold tone. In the blink of an eye, everyone felt a chill that was like ice and frost. Their faces couldn't help but change greatly, and their figures involuntarily retreated. They looked at Nie Tian in shock. They were so shocked that they couldn't describe it. Previously, no one had noticed Nie Tian's existence. Moreover, Nie Tian looked very ordinary, so it was indeed difficult for him to attract attention. However, at this moment, Nie Tian released a terrifying murderous aura. This was something that no one had expected. Nie Tian looked so young and his aura wasn't very strong. How could he have such a terrifying murderous aura? However, although Nie Tian had shocked the others, he didn't scare the martial artist from the Three Extremes sect. Young man, do you think you can scare me away with just a murderous aura? The martial artist from the Three Extremes sect sneered. He looked at Nye Tian with a domineering expression and said, "Do you know who I am? I am the constable of the Three Extremes sect. My name is Wu Hu." "So what?" Nye Tian frowned and replied in a cold tone. "Humph." Wu Hu sneered and said, "You injured people from the Three Extremes sect. Do you think you can leave safely?" Injured people from the Three Extremes sect? Wan Minghai was confused. He looked at Nye Tian and asked, "Did you fight with them just now?" Wu Hu looked at the innocent Wan Minghai with an ugly expression, but he still growled, "Why are you pretending to be confused? You are the one who injured them." "Me?" Wan Minghai exclaimed in surprise, a blank look on his face. He couldn't remember when he injured someone. "What do you want?" Nye Tian was a little impatient, but he still asked in a cold tone. He could tell that the Three Extremes sect was a big force in the heavenly martial sacred realm. There was no need to offend them for such a small matter. It would be best if he could settle this matter peacefully. "It's simple. Kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times and apologize to me. Then you can leave." Wu Hu thought that Nye Tian was scared, so he became even more arrogant and laughed wildly. "You say that again." Nye Tian's eyes darkened. He raised his head and stared at Wu Hu with his sharp eyes. Wu Hu instantly felt a sword intent hanging on his neck, which made it hard for him to breathe. He knew that if he made any strange movements, that sword intent would instantly take his life. He had never expected that Nye Tian, who looked so young, would be such a terrifying person. Chapter 46-36. You want to kill me?" Wu Hu could feel the life-threatening sword intent around his neck. He stared at Nye Tian with eyes wide open in shock. His tongue was stuck in his throat, but he couldn't utter a complete sentence. "What do you think?" Nye Tian's eyes were cold. He released his murderous intent and the surroundings became cold. I'm from the Three Extremes sect." "You!" Wu Hu's teeth were chattering as he tried to threaten Nye Tian with the Three Extremes sect. However, before he could finish his words, his eyes suddenly widened as he felt a warm liquid spurt out of his neck. At this moment, he knew that Nye Tian was going to kill him. He wanted to resist, but it was too late. Wu Hu covered his neck with his hands, but his body was paralyzed. His blood dyed the ground red. His body twitched a few times on the ground, then he lost all signs of life. Everyone was flabbergasted by what they were seeing. Countless eyes were fixed on Nye Tian, and none of them could utter a word. They had never thought that Nye Tian would be so powerful that he could kill Wu Hu. Wu Hu was not an ordinary person in the Three Extremes sect. He was a constable. The martial artists of the Three Extremes sect were named after the constable. The sect leader was the sect leader, followed by the constable and constable. The Three Extremes sect had a sect leader, 2 vice-sect leaders, dozens of constable masters, hundreds of constable masters, and thousands of constable masters. Although the constable was not a high position in the Three Extremes sect, he was still a leader, and he represented the face of the Three Extremes sect. Nye Tian had killed the constable of the Three Extremes sect in an instant, which was tantamount to declaring war on the Three Extremes sect. Even though Nye Tian was very strong, he was only one person. The Three Extremes sect was one of the top forces in the heavenly martial sacred world. How could one person resist them? Everyone guessed that unless Nye Tian had a powerful force behind him, he would definitely die in the heavenly martial sacred world. You killed our constable." After a long time, the other Three Extremes sect martial artists finally reacted. They looked at Nye Tian in horror and screamed, "Get lost!" Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he spat out a harsh word. He didn't want to kill anymore, so he didn't mind letting these small fries live. Since he had already offended the Three Extremes sect, it would be pointless even if he killed them to silence them. As such, he might as well do it openly. However, right at this moment, a middle-aged man in green pushed his way through the crowd and walked up to Nye Tian. Behind him was a member of the Three Extremes sect. The green-clothed middle-aged man walked over and sized up Nyetian. In a neither servile nor overbearing manner, he said in a deep voice, "You have killed someone from the Three Extremes sect. Please stay in the store for a while. When the people from the Three Extremes sect arrive, you can explain things clearly." It was obvious that he was a member of this restaurant. He was worried about Three Extremes sect's revenge, so he asked Nyetian to stay. After all, someone from the Three Extremes sect had died in his restaurant. If he didn't hand over the murderer to Three Extremes sect would definitely not let it go. Is the owner afraid of Three Extremes sect's revenge? Nyetian, of course, knew what the owner was thinking. He said with a faint smile, "Please don't worry. I won't involve outsiders in this. But I have something to do, so I must leave immediately. If the people from the Three Extremes sect arrive, tell them that I am Nyetian and I am from the Heaven Martial Association." He didn't want to put the owner in a difficult position, but he couldn't wait here for nothing. So, he directly told him that he was from the Heaven Martial Association. Anyway, he was going to the Heaven Martial Association next. Moreover, if he told him about the Heaven Martial Association, there might still be room for negotiation. You are from the Heaven Martial Association?" When the owner heard Nyetian's words, he was shocked and terrified. Seeing the owner's reaction, Nyetian couldn't help but frown. He asked, "Is the owner related to the Heaven Martial Association?" No. The owner acted as if he had seen a ghost. He waved his hands and took a few steps back, as if he was very afraid of Nyetian. Nyetian frowned even more. The owner's reaction was obviously not normal. What on earth happened? At this time, the others also became shocked when they found out that Nyetian was from the Heaven Martial Association. They wanted to say something, but they didn't dare to. "So you are a remnant of the Heaven Martial Association. No wonder you want to kill people from the Three Extremes sect." At this time, the warrior from the Three Extremes sect behind the owner spoke. He looked at Nyetian with a gloomy face. "Remnant?" When Nyetian heard these two words, his eyes darkened. He took a step forward and released a powerful chi. The warrior from the Three Extremes sect knelt down. A warrior can be killed, but not humiliated. The warrior from the Three Extremes sect had some backbone. Even though he knelt down, he raised his head and looked at Nyetian. "Speak clearly. What is going on?" Nyetian didn't bother to answer him. His eyes were like those of a demon. They shone coldly, as if he was going to eat someone in the next moment. Although the warrior had some willpower, he was too weak. Under the pressure of Nyetian, he couldn't stand it anymore. He said in a trembling voice, "Don't you know? The Heaven Martial Association has been destroyed by the Three Extremes sect. There is no Heaven Martial Association in the Holy Land of Heaven." "What did you say?" Nyetian's pupils instantly shrank, as if he were a raging beast that had gone berserk. When the others saw Nyetian in this state, they couldn't help but step back. They didn't dare to take a step forward. The Heaven Martial Association has been destroyed. When the warrior saw Nyetian in this state, he laughed arrogantly. "You are courting death." Nyetian's pupils suddenly constricted, and with a low roar, a wave of pressure was released. Before the cultivator could even react, his entire body fell to the ground, and his blood splattered on the spot as he died a miserable death. The onlookers were stunned by this scene and could not help but gasp in unison. Nyetian looked so young. How could he be so strong? The shopkeeper was also frightened. He couldn't stay calm anymore. His lips twitched. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. "Shopkeeper, is what he said true?" At that moment, Nyetian raised his head and stared at the shopkeeper. His murderous aura almost suffocated the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper's heart trembled. He was extremely shocked. No matter what, he was a heaven tribulation saint. He was a 9 heavenly tribulation saint. But why was he unable to fight back against Nyetian? How strong was Nyetian? The shopkeeper thought that Nyetian was so young. No matter how talented he would be in the heaven tribulation state at most. But now it seemed that he was wrong. He had underestimated Nyetian. Judging from Nyetian's strength, he was at least in the heaven enlightenment state. He might even be in the heaven martial arts state. But how old was Nyetian? How could he be in the heaven martial arts state? Speak. The shopkeeper didn't speak. Nyetian's eyes darkened. He took a step forward and his sword aura fell. The shopkeeper almost knelt down. He's telling the truth. The shopkeeper didn't dare to hide anything. He said with difficulty, about 10 days ago, the three extremes sect fought with the Heaven Martial Association. The Heaven Martial Association was defeated and destroyed. Chapter 46-38. Yu Jingchen's body was like a sword, and his blood qi was surging violently. His blood qi merged with the sharp sword qi and formed a huge sword qi shield. The dozens of martial artists in black were shocked by Yu Jingchen's aura, and they could not help but take a few steps back. They did not expect Yu Jingchen, who was seriously injured and at the end of his rope, to be able to burst out with such power. Didn't you guys want to kill me? Yu Jingchen's eyes were bloodshot, and he swept his gaze across the crowd. He roared like a wild beast, "Come on!" Everyone was shocked by him, and they actually felt a little timid. What are you afraid of? This brat is about to die, and I don't believe that he can still come up with any tricks. A martial artist in black sneered, and then he took a step forward and slashed at Yu Jingchen with his saber. The saber's shadow was like a mountain, and it shook the surroundings. Bang! In the next instant, the saber shadow fell, but it was blocked by the sword qi shield and directly shattered. Then, a sharp sword qi suddenly appeared, and before the black-clothed cultivator could react, he was directly cut into two. The air was filled with blood. What a terrifying sword essence! Everyone's faces changed, and they retreated again, looking at Yu Jingchen in horror. Yu Jingchen was so young, but his sword essence was so terrifying, and it was beyond everyone's expectations. A bunch of useless eggs! Yu Jingchen let out a thunderous roar, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Is this all the three extreme sects people can do? Brat, you still dare to be so arrogant in the face of death. A martial artist from the three extreme sect shouted, and he waved his hand. Brothers, let's attack together and break his sword qi shield. Okay. Everyone responded in unison, and their voices were loud. A bunch of trash, and when faced with a dying body like mine, you can only bully me with numbers. Yu Jingchen sneered, and the sword essence around him exploded as he tried his best to support the shield. Even now, he did not feel the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he was full of fighting spirit. Fight, fight to the last moment, fight to the last breath, fight to the last drop of blood. Kill. However, the level 3 cultivators did not care about Yu Jingchen's provocation. They shouted in unison and immediately attacked. Waves of violent energy gathered together and formed a momentum that could topple the mountains and overturn the seas, causing the entire canyon to tremble. Boom! In the next instant, a majestic sea of energy descended upon Yu Jingchen, shattering the sword energy shield that he had condensed with almost all of his blood qi. Boom! Bang bang bang! Immediately after, the terrifying force fell, smashing into the ground. The entire canyon shook, and a monstrous wave of earth rose up. The ground actually sank by 30%, and the surrounding rocks collapsed. The huge mountain was cracked. Hundreds of level 3 martial artists were pushed back a few meters by the recoil of the powerful force. After a while, the qi, the sword, and the sect, and Jingchen Yu of sect martial artists. Yu Jingchen Earth, and Qi Dao sect, a Yu, a sect. Earth Yu of sect, and sect. The three extreme sects cultivators stared at the motionless Yu Jingchen. None of them dared to step forward, as they were not sure if Yu Jingchen was really dead. Let me chop off this kid's head and claim the reward. After a long time, a cultivator finally lost his patience. With a loud shout, he charged over. When the others saw someone rushing over, their expressions changed, and they rushed forward to prevent him from killing Yu Jingchen. However, at this moment, Yu Jingchen suddenly stood up and revealed a row of terrifying white teeth on his bloodied face. He waved his hand, and a sword essence pierced through the air. Puff! The person who rushed forward did not even have time to react before his heart was pierced. His body trembled in the air, and when he fell to the ground, he died on the spot. The sudden scene caused everyone's expression to change greatly, and they all sucked in a breath of cold air in unison. How could Yu Jingchen, who was already on the verge of death, stand up again? Was his body made of steel? A bunch of rascals. My head is right here. If you have the ability, come and get it. Yu Jingchen's eyes were filled with killing intent, and he did not show any fear. Instead, he spoke in a low voice. He could feel that his body was on the verge of collapsing, and if he fell, he would not be able to stand up again. However, his final will told him not to fall. He must not fall. Could it be that this guy has an immortal body? Hundreds of martial artists from the three extremes sect hesitated in front of Yu Jingchen. Many of them were shocked, and they even subconsciously stepped back. They had never seen such a strong and unyielding person. Everyone, step back. At that moment a low voice sounded, and a burly man stepped forward. He was the leader of the group, the hall leader of the three extremes sect, Wu Tongqi. When the others saw that it was Wu Tongqi, they all stepped aside. Yu Jingchen, you are indeed a person with a connate sword essence. You are still able to last until now under the pursuit of so many people. Wu Tongqi's eyes were cold and he said in a low voice, your willpower is rare and I admire it. However, it is precisely because of this that you have to die. If you don't die with your talent and willpower, you will become the #1 enemy of the three extremes sect in no time. Sky Martial Realm. Yu Jingchen looked at Wu Tongqi with a sunken expression. Then, he suddenly laughed and said, to think that the three extremes sect would send a hall master to kill a seriously injured person like me. They really think too highly of me. Your talent is too strong, and the three extremes sect cannot afford to lose you. Wu Tongqi said coldly, Yu Jingchen, I respect your will. You should end your own life. If you want me to die, I'm afraid that hall leader Wu will have to do it personally. Yu Jingchen's eyes darkened and he replied in a low voice. Even if he knew that he was no match for Wu Tongqi, he still had to make a last struggle. Yu Jingchen, the connate sword essence, had no reason to kill himself. If that's the case, I won't stand on ceremony. Wu Tongqi's face darkened slightly. He extended his palm and a powerful force rolled out. The huge aura caused the surrounding air to show an extremely unique state of being enshrouded. Then, Wu Tongqi took a step forward, and his aura pressed down on Yu Jingchen. Yu Jingchen's body trembled, and he swayed a few times, almost falling to the ground. Very good. When Wu Tongqi saw that Yu Jingchen was still standing, he smiled cold, and he struck out with his palm, aiming for Yu Jingchen's heart. This palm strike was incomparably powerful. Moreover, it was swift and fierce, possessing the power to destroy mountains. Without a doubt, Yu Jingchen's fate would be certain to be death if this palm strike landed. Yu Jingchen's eyes didn't dim in the slightest in the face of such a violent pressure. Even though he was at his weakest, he still raised the sword in his hand. The powerful force pressed down on him like a tsunami, and Yu Jingchen could feel death approaching him. However, there was no fear in his eyes, and there was only a fierce will to fight. He could accept defeat. However, he could not accept defeat without fighting. This was his will to fight and his will to fight. Chapter 46-39. Tianwu Mountain Range, Blood-Bathing Canyon. Boom! The three extremes sect's hall leader Wu Tongqi attacked with all his might. He was determined to kill Yu Jingchen with a single strike. Yu Jingchen was as steady as a mountain. Even though he knew that he would not be able to block the attack, he did not show the slightest bit of fear. His eyes were as sharp as ever as he raised his Jingchen sword. Jingchen 9 swords, 7 killing blood. His sword technique, which was supposed to be extremely sharp, seemed so weak at this moment. In the next instant, a sharp attack broke through the weak sword momentum and headed straight for Yu Jingchen's heart. Wu Tongqi's eyes were filled with killing intent. He could already see Yu Jingchen falling. Even if Yu Jingchen was at his peak, he would not be able to block the attack, let alone the severely injured Yu Jingchen. However, at the moment of life and death, an unexpected change occurred. A ray of light fell from the sky and formed a shield that completely covered Yu Jingchen. Boom! In the next instant, the attack was perfectly blocked by the light shield. Yu Jingchen's body was as still as a mountain, and he did not move an inch. An expert! The corners of Wu Tongqi's lips curled up into a smile. His face instantly became ugly and his heart sank. He looked up into the sky. He was a divine ancestor at the first tier of the heaven martial arts realm, and he had not held back in his attack at all. However, the person who had come was able to block his attack so easily. This showed how powerful he was. But when his gaze landed, his expression involuntarily changed. He saw that the person who had come was a very young, silver-haired swordsman. The swordsman's eyes were as bright as stars and as sharp as blades. The sword intent around his body surged like an unfathomable abyss. Who the hell is this guy? Wu Tongqi clearly hadn't expected the person to be so young, and a completely unfamiliar face at that. Nia, Tian. Yu Jingchen was also taken aback, and when he raised his head to look, a familiar face entered his line of sight. His lips trembled as he called out a name. Then, he fell to the ground. At this moment, Nie Tian's appearance made him feel extremely relieved. His exhausted body, which was on the verge of collapse, could finally rest. Yu Jingchen! Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and his figure flashed like a bolt of lightning as he appeared beside Yu Jingchen and sent him into the 9 extremities. With the fat cat taking care of him, Yu Jingchen should be fine for the time being. Looks like I came at the right time. Nie Tian abruptly lifted his head and swept his gaze across Wu Tongqi and the others. His cold eyes flickered with a chilling light that made one shudder. Killing intent. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire canyon. All the warriors of the 3 Extremes sect, including Wu Tongqi, who was in the sky martial arts realm, felt a chill of killing at the same time. Wu Tongqi's eyes trembled, and his heart was filled with fear. Nie Tian looked so young, yet he was able to release such killing intent in an instant. It was truly shocking. Nie Tian. At the next moment, Wu Tongqi suddenly thought of something and exclaimed in shock, "Your hidden dragon Wu Kuei, Nie Tian." That's me. Nie Tian's eyes were cold, and the corners of his mouth raised into a cold arc. Hidden dragon Wu Kuei. This was perhaps the deepest impression the world had of him. Back in the Hidden Dragon battle, Nie Tian had been a nobody, yet he had defeated numerous powerful experts. He had even defeated Zhu Shi, who was ranked at the top of the heaven-subduing list. Since then, the name Nie Tian had spread throughout the all-heaven sacred world. Most people had not seen Nie Tian before, but there were very few who had not heard of his name. The reason why Wu Tongqi had such a deep impression of Nie Tian was not only because of Hidden Dragon Wu Kuei, but also because the 3 Extremes sect was also chasing after Nie Tian. Before the destruction of the Sky Martial Association, the 3 Extremes sect already knew about the relationship between Nie Tian and the Sky Martial Association. Because of this relationship, Nie Tian was also on the 3 Extremes sect's death list. However, Wu Tongqi had never thought that Nie Tian would actually appear in the Sky Martial Mountain Range at this time. This time, if he could kill Yu Jingchen and Nie Tian at the same time, then he, Wu Tongqi, would have made a great contribution to the 3 Extremes sect. In the future, as a hall leader, he would become the deputy sect leader and even compete for the position of sect leader. Thinking of this, Wu Tongqi could not help but smile. Even though Nie Tian was hidden dragon Wu Kuei, he was not afraid at all. After all, the hidden dragon battle was a battle between young martial artists. To sky martial arts experts like them, it was just child's play. He did not think that a mere hidden dragon Wu Kuei would be able to defeat him, the hall leader of the Three Extremes sect. Moreover, there were hundreds of martial artists from the Three Extremes sect behind him. Many of them were Tianjue holy emperors. How could they be afraid of Nie Tian? Everyone, listen up. This is the person that the Three Extremes sect must kill, Nie Tian. Wu Tongqi's eyes darkened and he said in a low voice, "Whoever kills him will be promoted by one level and given the title of elder." When the others heard this, their eyes lit up. The way they looked at Nie Tian was like a ferocious beast that had been starving for more than 10 days and had suddenly seen a little lamb. Three Extremes sect, gate, hall, courtyard, pavilion. Every promotion was as difficult as ascending to heaven. It was difficult for an ordinary disciple to get promoted in their entire life. However, if they killed Nie Tian, not only would they be promoted by one level, but they would also be given the title of elder. This was too tempting. Kill me? Just because of trash like you? Nie Tian sneered in the face of the ferocious killing intent, and then said in a clear voice, "Holy Venerable, please seal this valley and watch from the sidelines. Today I will slaughter dogs." Okay. A voice came from the sky, but there was no one there. Wu Tongqi frowned and his face was filled with suspicion. Could it be that Nie Tian had an expert by his side? In the next instant, a natural force descended from the sky, and it transformed into an invisible barrier that enveloped the entire canyon. Wu Tongqi immediately felt the change of time and space, and he could not help but frown. It seemed that the person in the sky had set up a barrier to seal the entire valley. However, this was equivalent to trapping Nie Tian in the same cage as everyone else. Nie Tian was so confident. Could his strength be comparable to the sky martial saint ancestor? Wu Tongqi was confused and he looked at Nie Tian with caution. Back then, Nie Tian had shocked the all-sacred world when he became the hidden dragon martial Kuei. Many people who had witnessed Nie Tian's strength believed that Nie Tian would become an existence that could shock the all-sacred world in the near future. However, it had only been a short time since the hidden dragon battle. Wu Tongqi did not believe that Nie Tian had grown to the point where he could fight against the sky martial saint ancestor. Nie Tian's gaze was filled with killing intent as he scanned the hundreds of Three Extremes sects cultivators before him. A cold murderous intent filled the air, sending chills down their spines. Wu Tongqi could feel the aura surrounding Nie Tian and became even more cautious. A hint of fear arose in his heart. Bang! At that moment, Nie Tian drew out the sky sword from its sheath. A powerful sword aura surged out like a tsunami, causing the surrounding valley to tremble. Chapter 4640. The moment Nie Tian unsheathed his sword, a powerful sword aura engulfed the entire valley, causing the earth and sky to tremble. What a terrifying sword aura! Wu Tongqi's pupils couldn't help but constrict abruptly when he felt the pressure of the sword that assaulted his face, and he was extremely astounded in his heart. He had not expected Nie Tian's sword aura to reach such a level. Although he did not know much about swordsmen, he knew a thing or two about them. He had seen quite a number of swordsmen in Saint Defire realm. Even though they could not be considered to be grandmasters of the sword, they were definitely the overlords of the sword. However, their sword auras were much weaker than Nie Tian's. Among all the swordsmen that Wu Tongqi had seen, there was no one who could compare to Nie Tian. What stage had Nie Tian reached in the Tao of the sword? How did he manage to unleash such terrifying sword momentum in such a short time? Previously, Wu Tongqi had thought that Nie Tian's strength should be similar to Yu Jingqian's. Even if he was slightly stronger than Yu Jingqian, he would not be much stronger. But now, he knew that he had made a huge mistake. Nie Tian was much stronger than Yu Jingchen. With just this sword aura, Nie Tian could fight against the sky martial divine ancestor. Today, the sword in the sky is a sword that kills. Nie Tian's eyes were cold as he glanced at the crowd. His cold voice was like a sigh of death, sending chills down everyone's spine. Hundreds of Three Extremes sect martial practitioners were actually forced to retreat uncontrollably under the threat of this chill. "What are you panicking about?" Wu Tongqi's eyes darkened and he shouted. "He is just a second-stage heaven perception Saint Emperor. Is he that scary? Everyone, listen up. Anyone who retreats will be beheaded without mercy." Yes. The martial artists from Three Extremes sect calmed down after Wu Tongqi shouted at them. They replied in unison. After all, they had been through countless life and death situations. They knew that if they were to cower now, they would die. "Everyone, listen up. Let's attack together and kill Nie Tian." Wu Tongqi's eyes turned cold as his aura surged to resist the sword aura in the air. Kill. The several hundred Three Extremes sect martial practitioners' morale was greatly boosted. They roared in unison, their killing intent surging. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, a series of attacks filled the sky, like a stampede of 10,000 beasts, directly pressing down on Nie Tian. Good timing. Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy, but he was not afraid at all. He let out a wild laugh and slashed out with the sword of sky. The celestial demon's sword will soared into the sky, shaking the void as if the world was about to collapse. Bang! Immediately after, the extreme sword momentum collided with the endless attack. A muffled sound rang out in the air as the terrifying impact force spread in all directions, wreaking havoc. Nie Tianling stood like a mountain, his figure never retreating. On the contrary, the hundreds of martial artists on the other side could not withstand the powerful impact. Many of them were sent flying, and some were forced to retreat. Only a few high-level heavenly sense martial artists managed to stabilize themselves. How can this guy be so strong? Wu Tongqi had yet to make a move. He could not help but be shocked by this scene. Facing the joint attack of hundreds of heavenly tribulation and heavenly sense martial artists, Nie Tian actually did not move at all. This kind of strength was terrifying. Even as the hall leader, he could not deal with the joint attack of so many people so calmly. At this moment, he realized that Nie Tian's strength was far beyond his expectations. "A bunch of trash, accept your death." However, at that moment Nie Tian suddenly moved. Like a streak of sword light, he shot out of nowhere. Bang, bang, bang. The next moment, wherever the flowing light passed, blood splattered everywhere. Countless Three Extremes sect martial practitioners did not even have time to scream before their bodies exploded under the impact of the powerful sword will. In the blink of an eye, the canyon was filled with bloody waterfalls. When Nie Tian's figure stopped, only a few dozen of the hundreds of Three Extremes sect martial practitioners were left. Wu Tongqi was dumbfounded by this scene. His lips could not help but twitch as if he wanted to say something, but he could not make a sound. In such a short time, Nie Tian had killed hundreds of people. This was too terrifying. Indeed, as Nie Tian had said, the sword in the sky had become a sword of killing and a sword of butchering dogs. The survivors stared at Nie Tian with flabbergasted expressions. The atmosphere was dead silent and oppressive. Is this guy a human or a ghost? After a long time, someone finally reacted and looked at Nie Tian with a trembling voice, as if he was a demon that had just walked out of hell. The strength that Nie Tian had displayed was far beyond their understanding of martial arts. Was Nie Tian really only at level 2 of the heavenly sense realm? Those who kill will always be killed. Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy, and the corners of his mouth twitched. When you massacred the Heaven Martial Association, you should have thought of this day. So you already knew that the Heaven Martial Association had been destroyed. No wonder you were so ruthless. The others looked at each other and did not dare to speak. After a while, Wu Tongqi stepped forward and smiled cold. "Tell me your name and I will spare your life." Nie Tian stared at Wu Tongqi coldly. The murderous intent in his eyes did not diminish. What a joke! Wu Tongqi tried his best to maintain his composure and said, "You are just a level 2 heavenly sense realm holy emperor. What makes you think you can fight against me? Is that so?" The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He slightly raised the clear sky sword and said, "Can a heaven martial saint ancestor like you block my sword?" All of a sudden, Wu Tongqi sensed that Nie Tian's aura had become several times stronger than before. Furthermore, a strange magical symbol had appeared at the corner of his eye, making his originally cold face look even more sinister. Wu Tongqi muttered. It seemed like Nie Tian was just fooling around. He had not shown his true strength. Wu Tongqi suddenly had a bad feeling. He might not be able to block Nie Tian's attack. "Tell me your name." Nie Tian's eyes darkened and said cold. I am Wu Tongqi, the leader of the 5-Lake Hall of the Sanji sect." Wu Tongqi's eyes were trembling, and his tongue was spinning uncontrollably. He had actually revealed his identity as if he had been possessed by a ghost. Perhaps, subconsciously, he had already submitted to Nie Tian. When the others heard Wu Tongqi reveal his identity, their expressions changed to one of shock. Mister, my name is Chunfeng, please don't kill me." I am Ho Qin, please spare my life." My name is Li Tongtong, please spare my life." At the next moment, not only did someone take the lead, but these people who usually killed without batting an eyelid all knelt down and reported their names, hoping that Nie Tian would spare them. However, there wasn't the slightest fluctuation in Nie Tian's eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched indifferently. These are the martial artists of the Sanji sect? These are their martial intents? These are the so-called sage rulers and sage emperors? By kneeling down and begging for mercy, not only would they not be able to save their lives, but they would also be giving up on their dignity. The sword in Nie Tian's hand was meant to kill. Why would he spare anyone? Chapter 46-41. Nie Tian did not have a murderous nature, but he did have a murderous intent. Once his murderous intent was triggered, he would kill them all. Facing a group of martial artists from the 3 Extremes sect who were already begging for mercy, Nie Tian's face was cold. The coldness in his eyes made him look like an emotionless killing machine. In an instant, everyone felt the cold murderous intent and they could not help but shudder. "Kill!" At that moment, Nie Tian's lips twitched as he spat out a cold word. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge wave of sword will shot up into the sky and filled the air. Then, it transformed into countless sword shadows that fell from the sky and turned into a rain of swords that pressed down on the martial artists from the 3 Extremes sect. Everyone was terrified. As they looked up at the rain of swords, they completely forgot to defend themselves. Bang, bang, bang. In the next instant, the rain of swords fell. Amidst the endless dull thuds, the shadows of swords drew blood. Hundreds of martial artists from the 3 Extremes sect were slaughtered without any resistance. There was only one exception. The leader of the 3 Extremes sects Wu Zehal Wu Tongqi. Nie Tian Yu. Wu Tongqi looked at the corpses all around him and his eyes trembled. He wanted to say something but could not. "What about me?" Nie Tian's eyes were cold as he said in a low voice, "When you attacked the Heaven Martial Association, did you think that this would happen?" Wu Tongqi's eyes trembled and his face turned as white as a sheet. The murderous intent and hatred in Nie Tian's eyes made him shudder. He could not imagine what such a young martial artist had experienced to be able to cultivate such a terrifying aura. He had seen countless young martial artists before, but all of them gave off the feeling that they were pretentious. But Nie Tian was completely different. His aura was so strong that it did not pale in comparison to those martial artists. "Today, I originally wanted to kill all of you." Nie Tian looked at Wu Tongqi and said in a low voice, "But now, I feel that there is a need to send a signal to the Three Extremes sect. So, you can live. Are you really willing to let me go?" Wu Tongqi no longer had any will to fight. When he heard Nie Tian's words, he suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked with a trembling voice, "I only said that you can live. I didn't say that I would spare you." Nie Tian, on the other hand, had a gloomy expression on his face. His eyes were emitting a sinister cold light. "What do you mean?" Wu Tongqi instantly felt a chill in his face. His expression changed, and his heart trembled inexplicably. In the next moment, before he could even react, several strands of sword qi pounced towards him. Pooh! Sword qi swept through the air, and a sharp force descended. Wu Tongqi only felt a flash of cold light in front of his eyes, and then he saw blood on his left and right. Then, when he came to his senses, he discovered that his arms had been cut off at the shoulder. Nie Tian, you! Wu Tongqi was startled awake, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. He looked at Nie Tian with incomparable fear, but before he could finish speaking, he suddenly felt a strange energy surge in his body, and his eyes couldn't help but narrow. Bang! 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 Immediately, Wu Tongqi heard the sound of something cracking inside his body. His body stumbled back a few steps, and he fell to the ground. Then, he realized what had happened. His face was as white as paper, and his lips were twitching, but he couldn't make a sound. He didn't think that after Nie Tian cut off his arms, he would also destroy his yuan meridians, turning him into a cripple. "I told you, you can live. As for how you live, it's up to me." Nie Tian spoke in a low voice. "The people from the Three Extremes sect should be here soon. Just stay here and help me tell your leader that Nie Tian is here for revenge." "You!" Wu Tongqi's eyes trembled, and the shock in his eyes deepened. Nie Tian, was he really going to fight against the entire Three Extremes sect by himself? "Remember what I said, don't forget." Nie Tianling snickered. Then, his silhouette moved, and he disappeared in the blink of an eye. Like a pile of mud, Wu Tongqi sat on the ground, and he looked at the bloody scene around him in despair. Nie Tian dashed out of the canyon and left the Tianwu mountain range. High up in the sky, Nie Tian and Wan Minghai were rushing towards Tianwu City. Along the way, Nie Tian didn't speak. Even though Wan Minghai had many questions, he didn't say anything. Even though Nie Tian already knew that the Tianwu sect had been destroyed, he still had a sliver of hope in his heart. Hence, he was rushing to Tianwu City to see what had happened. Very quickly, the two of them arrived at the outskirts of Tianwu City. From afar, they could see that there was a long queue outside the city gate. Nie Tian frowned and his expression turned ugly. But after thinking for a while, he decided to stand at the back of the queue. "Brother, may I know what's going on?" Nie Tian looked around and asked a cultivator beside him. That person glanced at Nie Tian and seemed a little impatient. But he still said, "Don't you know? The Tianwu sect has been destroyed by the Three Extremes sect. Now Tianwu City is under the Three Extremes sect's control. Now, the Three Extremes sect is hunting for the remaining members of the Tianwu sect." "Thank you." Nie Tian frowned and nodded to express his gratitude. It seemed that the Three Extremes sect was going to destroy the Tianwu sect. "Nie Tian, what should we do?" Wan Minghai frowned and asked in a low voice. "Let's enter the city first." Nie Tian replied in a low voice. He was thinking that they shouldn't have a direct conflict with the Three Extremes sect first. Once they entered the city, they would check on the Tianwu sect. The two of them lined up in the crowd, and after half a day, they finally entered the city. The Three Extremes sect was very strict, but Nie Tian and Wan Minghai didn't arouse their suspicions, and they successfully entered the city. After entering the city, Nie Tian immediately went to the Tianwu sect. On the way, there were martial artists of the Three Extremes sect patrolling everywhere. Even though Nie Tian and Wan Minghai tried to keep a low profile, they were still questioned a few times. What kind of hatred does the Tianwu sect have with the Three Extremes sect? Even after the destruction of the Three Extremes sect, they still won't let us go. Wan Minghai's face darkened, and he secretly sent a message to Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he replied, "This is definitely not simple. Although the Three Extremes sect is powerful, they are far from being able to destroy the Tianwu sect in one day." "You mean there is a powerful force behind the Three Extremes sect?" Wan Minghai was very smart, and he immediately understood what Nie Tian was implying. He couldn't help but frown. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and didn't say anything more. By then, they had already arrived at the Tianwu Square, and the Tianwu sect was already in front of them. However, on the Tianwu Square, groups of martial artists of the Three Extremes sect were interrogating people. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to pass easily. "You two, what are you doing?" At that moment, a group of martial artists on patrol noticed Nie Tian and Wan Minghai, and they directly walked over and asked cold. "We are just passing by." Nie Tian forced himself to suppress the anger in his heart and replied coldly. "Passing by?" The leader of the patrol looked gloomy. He looked Nie Tian up and down and suddenly said with a smile, "I think you are the remnants of the Tianwu sect, right?" Chapter 46-42. In the Sky Martial Arts Square. A captain of the Three Extremes sect stared at Nie Tian and Wan Minghai with a gloomy face and a murderous look on his face. Although the Heaven Martial Association had been destroyed, the Three Extremes sect was not careless at all. The sect master had ordered the whole world to hunt down the remnants of the Heaven Martial Association. If they encountered any suspicious people, they would rather kill the wrong ones than let them go. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as the anger he had been suppressing began to flare up. "Sir, we are just passing by. We can't be the remnants of the Heaven Martial Association." Before Nie Tian could say anything, Wan Minghai waved his hand with a smile. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed that the heaven-punishing Saint Master had such a side to him. "Arrest them." However, the patrol captain completely ignored Wan Minghai and directly ordered for him to be arrested. Nie Tian's eyes darkened and a murderous look appeared in his eyes. He did not want to attack them, but these people insisted on forcing him. So, they could not blame him. But at this moment, Wan Minghai winked at Nie Tian, telling him not to act rashly. The square was full of people from the Three Extremes sect. Once they started fighting, it would be very troublesome. If they could not get rid of everyone in a short time, more martial artists from the Three Extremes sect would be attracted, and it would be difficult for them to escape. Nie Tian did not know what Wan Minghai was going to do, but he suppressed his impulse and did not attack. "Come with us." Two martial artists of the Three Extremes sect escorted Nie Tian and Wan Minghai to the center of the square with cold faces. At the center of the square, hundreds of martial artists were being guarded, including some teenagers. "Stay here obediently." The two martial artists of the Three Extremes sect pushed Nie Tian and Wan Minghai into the crowd. Nie Tian's face darkened, but he did not attack them. He looked around and saw that everyone was desperate, like a flock of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Only then did Nie Tian see that not only were there teenagers, but there were also children as young as 7 or 8 years old, and even infants as young as 2 or 3 years old. "Are you all from the Heaven Martial Association?" Nie Tian's face was gloomy as he asked a white-haired old man beside him. This old man looked very old, but he had an extremely vigorous aura. However, this aura seemed to be suppressed by some kind of power. He should have been heavily injured. "I am the leader of the Martial Heaven Alliance, Old Shui." The old man's gaze was deep. Even though the light in his eyes was a little dim, it was still like a pair of eyes standing upright, as if he could see through people's hearts. He asked, "Young man, you are not from the Heaven Martial Association, are you?" "I'm Senior Scarlet Life's friend." Nie Tian thought for a moment and nodded. "President's friend? When Xue Deshang heard Nie Tian mention the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence, his eyes darkened. He seemed to be wondering if the latter was lying. After all, Nie Tian was too young to be friends with the Scarlet Life Dan Xan. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and said, Junior once had the chance to become friends with Senior Qi Ming. This time, I came to the Heaven Marshal meeting to see Senior Qi Ming. You came to see the president? Xue Deshang frowned and couldn't help but be more suspicious. The reason why the Sanji sect wanted to hunt down the remnants of the Heaven Marshal Association was not only to eliminate them, but also to find out many secrets of the Heaven Marshal Association. Xue Deshang saw that Nie Tian was a stranger, so he was obviously not a member of the Heaven Marshal Association. However, he kept saying that he was familiar with the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence, so he couldn't help but guess that Nie Tian might be a spy planted by the Sanji sect to get the secrets of the Heaven Marshal Association from him. Yes. Nie Tian saw that Xue Deshang was suspicious of him, but he still nodded and asked, Elder Xue, do you know where Senior Qi Ming is now? I don't know. Xue Deshang frowned and shook his head coldly. He was now very sure that Nie Tian must be a spy of the Sanji sect. In the battle between the Sanji sect and the Heaven Marshal Association, the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence was seriously injured, but it escaped. Nie Tian immediately asked about the whereabouts of the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence. If he was not a spy, then what was he? Elder Xue, Nie Tian knew that Xue Deshang's suspicion was wrong. He wanted to explain, but he was interrupted by the latter. A word of advice. Don't waste your energy. You want to get the secrets of the Heaven Marshal Association from me? No way. Xue Deshang said coldly, no longer hesitating. Nie Tian looked a little embarrassed. It seemed that the other party thought he was a spy of the Sanji sect. But now, Xue Deshang was obviously angry, so it was useless to explain. So he could only give up. After a long time, Nie Tian tried to talk to Xue Deshang, but the latter directly turned his head and ignored him. At this time, the people of the Sanji sect began to surround them. A moment later, hundreds of martial artists of the Sanji sect surrounded them. Everyone couldn't help but shrink back, not daring to look at the people of the Sanji sect. Everyone, listen up. I am Qi Yi, the leader of the Seven Mountains Hall of the Sanji sect. At this time, a short and fat martial artist stood out and said loudly, As long as you tell me the secret of the Sky Sword Tower, everyone here can live. If you can't, don't blame me for being ruthless. The crowd was frightened. They looked around helplessly and whispered to each other. What is the Sky Sword Tower? Why have I never heard of it? I am not from the Heaven Marshal Association. I just want to watch the show. Why did you catch me? Who knows about the Sky Sword Tower? Tell us quickly. Don't get us into trouble. The crowd was a little flustered. No one wanted to die here. But unfortunately, no one stood out to say anything. The Sky Sword Tower was one of the 3 great treasures of the Heaven Marshal Association. It was said that the Sky Sword Tower contained endless sword principles, and even the secret of unity of man and sword. But it was a pity that ordinary people couldn't come into contact with the Sky Sword Tower. Only the top management of the Heaven Marshal Association and some top geniuses could enter the Sky Sword Tower. More than half of the people here were not from the Heaven Marshal Association. The remaining half were the lowest level people in the Heaven Marshal Association. How would they know the secret of the Sky Sword Tower? Even Xue Deshang, who was an elder, knew very little about the Sky Sword Tower. Why, no one wants to say anything. After a while, Qi Yi saw that no one stood out. His fat face instantly became extremely gloomy. He glanced at the crowd and said eerily, If that's the case, then I will start killing. Killing. As soon as these 2 words fell, everyone's expression changed. The martial artists from the 3 extremes sect were extremely cruel and killed people like flies. Qi Yi's hands were stained with blood to become the hall leader. When he said killing, it was definitely not just a threat. Men, catch the 2 little ones. Chiyi's face was cold as he ordered. Yes. Two martial artists from the Three Extremes sect answered and rushed into the crowd like tigers and wolves. They actually caught two children who were only 7 or 8 years old. Help, help, I don't want to die. The two children were so frightened that they screamed miserably. Nye Tian furrowed his brows, and his eyes burned with fury. Chapter 46-43. The screams of the two children were heart-wrenching, but it did not affect the people from the Triple Extremes sect. The one who knows the secret of the Heavenly Sword Pagoda, look closely. These two children died because of your silence. The leader of the 7 Mountain Hall, Chi-yi, wore a cold expression as he scanned the crowd. Words that were meant to kill. He wanted to force the crime of murder onto someone else and force that person to show himself. However, no one in the crowd stepped forward. Kill! Chi-yi's eyes were dark. He did not hesitate and shouted. The two level 3 martial artists looked at each other and pressed their palms on the children's heads. Many people could not bear to watch this scene any longer and closed their eyes one after another. In the next moment their brains would burst open. However, just as the two level 3 martial artists pressed their palms down, the sound of something piercing through the air was heard. Then, the two level 3 martial artists fell into a pool of blood. What happened? Everyone's expression changed as they stared at the two corpses on the ground in shock. Everything had happened too quickly. Almost no one knew what was going on. Who are you? Why are you hiding? Show yourself if you have the guts. Chi-yi was also taken aback as he growled in a low voice. He did not expect something like this to happen. As such, he did not notice the person who had attacked. It's him. Xuedeshang, on the other hand, saw everything clearly. He knew that it was Nye Tian who had attacked. He did not expect Nye Tian to save them. Are you trying to fool me with such a clumsy act? Xuedeshang frowned and sneered to himself. He was certain that Nye Tian was a spy sent by the Triple Extremes sect. As such, Nye Tian was only putting on a show for him. At that moment, Nye Tian slowly walked out from the crowd. When Chi-yi saw Nye Tian, he couldn't help but frown. He did not expect the person to be such a young martial artist. Furthermore, Nye Tian's aura was not strong. His cultivation base was only at the 2nd level of the Heaven Enlightenment realm. It was hard to imagine how such a person could kill 2 level 3 martial artists in an instant. Were you the one who attacked just now? Chi-yi was a little doubtful. He wasn't even sure if it was Nye Tian who did it. It's me. Nye Tian faintly smiled, but his eyes were faintly surging with extreme killing intent. Very well. Let this hall master see what kind of ability you have to dare behave atrociously in front of this hall master. Chi-yi could feel the killing intent in Nye Tian's eyes. His face darkened and his aura surged. He was going to take action personally. Lord Hall Master, there's no need to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. This brat is mediocre, let this subordinate deal with him. However, before he could finish his words, a martial artist from the Three Extremes sect, who was as thin as a stick, walked over and stared coldly at Nye Tian. Chi-yi's eyes darkened as he nodded. Come on. Nye Tian was very calm. To him, it didn't matter who his opponent was. You are seeking death. The man was enraged by Nye Tian's disdainful attitude. He let out a fierce roar and released his aura. A powerful saber aura pressed down on Nye Tian. This guy was as skinny as a stick. Who would have thought he was a bladesman? Plus, before Nye Tian, he chose not to use his blade. Nye Tian's lips twitched. His feet moved slightly as his sword will surged out. Wretch! In the next second, wherever the sword will passed, the blade was destroyed. The bladesman's body trembled and, like the other two before him, died in a pool of blood before he could even scream. Everyone was petrified by the scene before them and gasped. The way they looked at Nye Tian was full of shock and fear. Who would have thought that the seemingly ordinary Nye Tian would be so powerful? Not to mention the fact that his attacks were so ruthless and terrifying? Shang was also shocked by the scene before him. He was confused. He had sensed Nie Tian's strength long ago and had even been worried that Nie Tian would be killed. But now what he saw with his eyes was too strange. One must know that the blade wielder just now was a true celestial perception Saint Emperor. He was only a step away from the Tian Qi stage. Nie Tian was only in the second-level heaven perception realm. How did he kill a ninth-level heaven perception realm Saint Emperor? His sword will is extraordinary. Shang's eyes darkened as he thought to himself. He was an elder of the Martial Heaven Association and a swordsman. Even though he was seriously injured, he was still very sensitive to sword will. Although it was only for an instant, he could clearly feel that Nie Tian's sword will was not something an ordinary swordsman could compare to. Based on Nie Tian's age, no one at the same age as him could compete with him. Perhaps Yu Jingchen, with his connate sword embryo, might have a chance to compete with Nie Tian in terms of sword will. Who the hell is this kid? Shang was confused about Nie Tian's identity again. He had already determined that Nie Tian was a spy of the Triple Extremes sect, but things were different now. Nie Tian's strength and talent were too outstanding. The Triple Extremes sect would never use someone like him as a spy. Hall Master Chiue, right? It's your turn. At this moment, Nie Tian raised his brows and stared at Qi. Qi was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. His face was so ugly that it turned purple. The scene just now was too shocking for him. Although he was a sky martial divine ancestor, it was impossible for him to kill a ninth-level heaven perception realm Saint Emperor so easily like Nie Tian. From this point of view, he had already lost to Nie Tian. Kid, who are you? Qi suppressed the fear in his heart and forced himself to remain calm as he asked solemnly. He did not want to take the risk. All he wanted was to buy himself some time and wait for the other experts of the Triple Extremes sect to arrive. Nie Tian's strength was so mysterious that he couldn't help but raise his guard. One move. Nie Tian completely ignored Qi's question. Instead, the corners of his mouth twitched as he coldly said two words. Qi felt a chill in his face. His expression changed and he blurted out in shock, "What did you say?" "One move to kill you." Nie Tian's lips curled up and he said eerily, "How presumptuous." Qi felt a strong murderous intent. However, he was a sky martial divine ancestor who had experienced countless life and death situations. He tried his best to remain calm, hoping that he could scare Nie Tian. But at this moment Nie Tian's figure moved. A long sword appeared in his hand, and he lightly flicked it in the air. Sword Qi, as majestic as a mountain, as sharp as a blade, suddenly shot out, directly towards Qi. Qi's eyes widened. He tried to resist, but it was too late. Bang! The next second, the shadow of the sword passed by and the air was dyed red with blood. The Hall Master of the Seven Moons Hall of the Triple Extremes sect died without any resistance. "My name is Nie Tian." Nie Tian sheathed his sword, clasped his hands behind his back, and said his name. Chapter 46-44. My name is Nie Tian. The calm voice caused everyone's expression to change. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable terror and fear. With just one slash, Qi was instantly killed by Nie Tian. He did not even have the chance to resist. Qi was a sacred ancestor of the sky martial arts realm. Meanwhile, Nie Tian was only at the second-layer heaven perception realm. How did he do it? Without a doubt, the strength that Nie Tian had displayed had overturned everyone's understanding of martial arts. Shang, who was in the crowd, was stunned. It took him a while to react. His lips were trembling, as if he wanted to say something, but he could not make a sound. He was now certain that Nie Tian was not a spy of the Triple Extremes sect. If Nie Tian had only killed two ordinary cultivators of the Triple Extremes sect, it could be said that he was acting according to his identity. However, He had killed the leader of the Seven Mountain Hall, Chi-E. The price was too high for the Triple Extremes sect. More importantly, Nye Tian's strength was too strong. At his age, he would be considered a top genius even in the all-sacred world. If the Triple Extremes sect had a genius like him, it would definitely be nurtured by the next leader. Why would they send him on a mission as a spy? So, who exactly was Nye Tian? Nye Tian, I think I've heard that name before. Xue Desheng was confused. His mind was racing. At a certain moment, his eyes flickered with joy, emitting a flicker of excitement. He finally remembered that Nye Tian was a name that the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence had mentioned before. He also remembered that the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence had brought back a woman called Mo Rushi, who had an unusual relationship with Nye Tian. He said he knew the leader. Looks like he wasn't lying. Xue Desheng stared at Nye Tian with a burning gaze, as if he was looking at a life-saving straw. With Nye Tian's strength and talent, if he was willing to help the Heaven Martial Association, he might be able to bring a ray of hope to the already destroyed Heaven Martial Association. Even if Nye Tian didn't have the ability to save the Heaven Martial Association now, he would definitely become a figure that could shake the heavens in the future. At that time, his strength alone would be enough to suppress the entire Three Extremes sect. The revenge of the Heaven Martial Association will be repaid with blood. And at this moment Nye Tian spoke. His ice-cold voice was like the low moan of the abyss of death, landing in the ears of the Three Extremes sect disciples like muffled thunder. All of you, attack together. Nye Tian's gaze was cold and murderous, and he didn't hesitate to speak in a deep voice. Unfortunately, the several hundred Three Extremes sect cultivators had personally witnessed their hall master being instantly killed by Nye Tian. At this moment, how could they have the courage to make a move? Some of the Three Extremes sect disciples standing at the outermost edge saw that the situation was not good and retreated one after another. Clearly, they wanted to escape. If we fight, we might have a chance of survival. If we run, we will definitely die. Nye Tian's gaze was as sharp as a blade. As soon as he spoke, his sword will was activated and more than a dozen rays of sword chi pierced through the air. Everywhere they passed, blood reeked. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the several hundred Three Extremes sect disciples had been killed or injured. Run, this guy is too scary. Run, let's run together. He won't be able to kill all of us. Hurry up and inform the leader that the Heaven Martial Association's powerhouses have shown up. Just like that, the people of the Three Extremes sect became even more panicked. Without caring about anything else, they scattered in all directions. In their eyes, Nye Tian was like a god of death. Even though these people were panicking, they were smart enough to run in different directions. It was obvious that they were trying to distract Nye Tian. Sadly, they had underestimated Nye Tian's strength. Do you think you can escape? Nye Tian glanced around and his lips curled up into a cold smile. Then, the sword in the sky rose into the air. Like a dragon breaking out of the abyss, the sword's will was so strong that it seemed like it could swallow the heaven and the earth. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the next second, the sword in the sky emitted a crisp hum. Instantly, countless rays of sword shadows appeared in the air. As if they had eyes, they attacked the fleeing cultivators of the Three Extremes sect. Bang, bang, bang. What followed next was the most tragic scene. Wherever the sword shadows fell, streaks of bloody light appeared in the air. From afar, it was breathtaking, but upon closer inspection, it was a ghastly sight. Everyone stared at the horrifying scene in the sky and couldn't help but gasp. Once again, they were stunned. He couldn't believe that Nye Tian had become so powerful. Without a doubt, this scene would be unforgettable for the rest of their lives. He is so young, yet his control over the will of the sword has reached such a level. As a swordsman, Xue Desheng could naturally tell what was truly terrifying about Nye Tian. Nye Tian's will of the sword was powerful and terrifying. However, it wasn't heaven-defying. What was truly heaven-defying was his ability to control the will of the sword. Every ray of swords will accurately kill a cultivator of the three extremes sect. To be able to control more than 100 rays of swords will, at the same time, was not something an ordinary swordsman could do. Shweta asked himself if he was at his peak condition. He could also kill all the escaping cultivators of the three extremes sect. But his method was definitely to use the sword shadows to kill everything in sight. Even with his many years of cultivation, he couldn't control the will of the sword as well as Nye Tian could. From this aspect, he had completely lost to Nye Tian. Wan Minghai was also shocked by Nye Tian. Before, he merely thought Nye Tian was extremely talented. It wasn't until now that he truly felt Nye Tian's strength and terror. The people of the three extremes sect will be here soon. You'd better run. After a while, Nye Tian glanced at the crowd and said in a loud voice, "Thank you, my lord, for saving our lives. Thank you, my lord." At this time, the crowd finally came to their senses. They hurriedly thanked him and quickly left. Nye Tian looked at the backs of the fleeing crowd. He didn't look good. He didn't know how many of these people would survive in the end. But his ability was limited. It was impossible for him to save everyone. Soon, most of the people in the square had left. However, there were dozens of people who didn't move at all. Instead, they looked at Nye Tian expectantly. "Why didn't you leave?" Nye Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. "My lord Nye Tian, we are all cultivators of the Heaven Martial Association. Please lead us to fight against the three extremes sect." A burly man walked out and said to Nye Tian with his hands folded, "I alone am enough to fight against the three extremes sect. You just need to stay alive. You can come back when the Heaven Martial Association needs you." Nye Tian's eyes darkened slightly as he said coldly. He respected these people's unyielding struggle, but he really didn't need them at this time. If he was alone, Nye Tian wouldn't have any concerns. If he brought these people with him, he would have too many concerns. "My lord Nye Tian, please trust us. We won't be a burden to you." The burly man didn't give up. His eyes were full of anger as he said heavily, "Why should a man be afraid of death? If the people of the three extremes sect come, we won't lose anything by killing one. If we kill two, we'll make a profit." Chapter 46-45. Killing one wouldn't make a loss, but killing two would make a profit. The strong man was full of vigor, as if he was not afraid of death. Nye Tian frowned. He was indeed worried that if these people followed him, they would not only be of no help, but might even become a burden. However, he was touched by the strong man. "Nye Tian, the people from the three extremes sect will be here soon. If you ask them to leave now, you'll be sending them to their deaths." Shweta walked over and said without hesitation. Nye Tian's eyes darkened. He was well aware of this, but he didn't want to say it out loud. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if the 100 people present left now, less than 1 in 10 would be able to survive the attack of the three extremes sect. "Elder Shwe, do you have better arrangements?" Nye Tian asked, sensing the hidden meaning behind Shweta words. Shweta frowned. He hesitated for a while, then said, "Come with me." Nye Tian nodded. He guessed that Shweta was going to take them to a secret place of the Heaven Martial Arts Association. Shweta was an elder of the Heaven Martial Arts Association after all, so he must know some secrets that ordinary martial artists didn't. Then, Shweta led the crowd through the Sky Martial Arts Square and to the entrance of the Heaven Martial Arts Association. "Everyone, I'm going to take you to one of the secret places of the Heaven Martial Arts Association. Ordinary disciples can't enter these secret places, but the situation is urgent, so we can't care too much about the rules," Shweta said in a deep voice as he glanced at the crowd. In fact, since the Heaven Martial Arts Association had been destroyed, he didn't mind taking the disciples of the Heaven Martial Arts Association into the secret places. His biggest worry was that there were spies from the Three Extremes sect among the 100 people in front of him. Previously, he had been worried that Nyetian was a spy from the Three Extremes sect. Later, it was proven that Nyetian wasn't. But that didn't mean that the Three Extremes sect wouldn't have other spies. The crowd nodded, their faces full of sorrow. The Heaven Martial Arts Association, which used to be glorious and stood at the top of the Heaven Martial Arts Association, had only a few people left in such a short time. "Come with me." Xuedeshang nodded and led the crowd into the Heaven Martial Arts Association. They passed through the main hall and came to a secret entrance in the backyard. Xuedeshang stopped and said in a deep voice, "This is the entrance to the Zhongshuan land." Zhongshuan land. Several people were astonished when they heard this name. The Zhongshuan land was one of the 4 great secret areas of the Heaven Martial Association, a rare cultivation paradise. Legend had it that the Zhongshuan land was filled with an extremely mysterious saint power, known as Zhongshuan power. The name Zhongshuan force came from the Zhongshuan force. It was said that Zhongshuan force was an extremely ancient saint power that existed in a slightly different form from the power of the current saint's world. For an ordinary practitioner, the effect of absorbing the same amount of Zhongshuan energy would be more than 10 times that of absorbing ordinary saint energy. Hence, every president of the martial heaven continent would cultivate in the Zhongshuan land and borrow its power to rapidly raise their cultivation. Most of the Heaven Martial Association's practitioners had only heard of the Zhongshuan land, but no one knew where it was, much less enter it. How could the crowd not be shocked that Xuedeshang wanted to bring everyone into the Zhongshuan land? "Everyone, you are all disciples of the Heaven Martial Association, so you should know how important the Zhongshuan land is to the Heaven Martial Association." Xuedeshang's gaze was solemn as he said in a loud voice, "Normally, the Zhongshuan land would only be open to the upper echelons of the Heaven Martial Association, and the time it would be open is very limited. But there is a reason for today's events, so I will temporarily take all of you into the Zhongshuan land to seek refuge. However, there are some things that I must make clear first." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the crowd, giving off a heavy deterrent as he continued, "First, after entering the Zhongshuan land, everyone must listen to my orders. No one is allowed to move around without my permission. Second, the Zhongshuan power is extraordinary. You are entering the Zhongshuan land to seek refuge, not to cultivate. Therefore, no one is allowed to cultivate or absorb even the slightest bit of Zhongshuan power. Third, there are many secrets regarding the Heaven Martial Association in the Zhongshuan land. After you leave, you are not allowed to tell anyone else about the situation inside. If anyone fails to comply with these 3 conditions, I will not allow you to enter the Zhongshuan land." Nie Tian could not help but frown slightly at Xuedeshang's words. It was already so late, yet Xuedeshang was still listing out so many rules. Some people did not know whether to laugh or cry. "I agree to Elder Xue's conditions." "I also agree." "We all agree." However, everyone expressed their agreement the moment Xuedeshang's words rang out. In most people's eyes, the Zhongshuan land was a sacred land, and being able to enter was already a great blessing. Who would dare to be rash and do something that they should not do? Since everyone has agreed, I will open the Zhongshuan land now. Xuedeshang's eyes darkened slightly as he nodded, before he took a step forward and arrived at the small door behind him. His hands formed a seal as waves of sealing power slowly surged out, transforming into strange runes that imprinted themselves onto the small door. However, there was no change to the small door, and there were no signs of it opening. Everyone held their breaths, not even daring to breathe too loudly for fear of disturbing Xuedeshang. Nie Tian sent his senses over. Moments later, he could not help but furrow his brows tightly. He could sense that an extremely powerful sealing rune was needed to open the small door. However, Xuedeshang's speed was not fast. Given his current speed, it would take him at least an hour to open the small door. Nie Tian's guess was correct. Xue Desheng would likely need several hours to open the Tsangshuan Gate. Under normal circumstances, the 6 elders of the Heaven Martial Association would work together to open the Tsangshuan Gate, and it would take several minutes. But now only Xue Desheng was left. Moreover, he was seriously injured, so it would take even more time. Nie Tian, I think it will take quite some time to open the small door. Wan Minghai also saw the clues and secretly transmitted to Nie Tian. But the people from the 3 Extremes sect will soon find this place. A tough battle will be unavoidable. Nie Tian faintly nodded and replied in a solemn voice, Lord Saint, if the people from the 3 Extremes sect come, I'll have to trouble you to protect Elder Xue. He had already thought of this, and was already mentally prepared. Xue Desheng was of utmost importance at this moment, so he needed to protect him. Besides Nie Tian, the person most suitable to protect Xue Desheng was Wan Minghai. Moreover, this battle was after all the Heaven Martial Association. If Wan Minghai were to interfere too much, Nie Tian would feel bad. Letting Wan Minghai protect Xue Desheng was the best arrangement. Yes. Wan Minghai nodded with a faint smile. Don't worry, with me around, no one will be able to hurt Elder Xue. Chapter 46-46. With Wan Minghai's promise, Nie Tian felt a lot more at ease. As long as Wan Minghai protected Xue Desheng, it would be a great help to Nie Tian. As long as the 3 Extremes sect did not send too many people, Nie Tian was confident he could deal with them. From what he could see, the 3 Extremes sect was not as strong as the rumors said. At least for now, they had yet to make Nie Tian feel too threatened. Nie Tian had already killed 2 hall masters of the 3 Extremes sect. Moreover, he had done it in a single move, making it extremely easy for him. If the ones who came were at the level of a hall master or village head, they would not be able to shake Nie Tian. Nie Tian was very relaxed, but the others were extremely nervous, their faces filled with fear as if they were facing a great enemy. While everyone was panicking, Xue Desheng was fully focused on opening the Tsangshuan Gate. Unfortunately, his progress was extremely slow. At the current speed, it will likely take several hours before the gate can be opened. Nie Tian frowned slightly. He really did not expect opening the gate to be so troublesome. There's no point in panicking now, we can only wait. Wan Minghai glanced at Nie Tian with a bitter smile. Nie Tian nodded, not saying anything. Nie Tian. However, Wan Minghai's expression tensed slightly at this moment, evidently sensing something. So fast. Nie Tian's first reaction was that Wan Minghai had discovered the 3 Extremes sect, causing his heart to sink. He knew that even in the myriad worlds, Wan Minghai's senses were far from his. Expert. Wan Minghai frowned, his expression focused as if he was sensing something. After a long pause, he finally uttered these 2 words in a deep voice. Nie Tian's gaze darkened slightly as his expression changed. Wan Minghai did not even have the slightest desire to attack when he saw the 2 hall masters earlier. Someone who could elicit such a reaction from Wan Minghai was definitely not an ordinary person. Look, it's the 3 Extremes sect. After a while, many figures appeared in the sky. Their auras merged together, surging and pressing down on the group. It seemed that they were the cultivators of the 3 Extremes sect. So many have come. Nie Tian's face darkened as he felt uneasy. He didn't expect that the people from the 3 Extremes sect would arrive so quickly and in such large numbers. In the blink of an eye, the sky above was directly occupied by thousands of level 3 martial artists. A terrifying aura descended from the sky, making people feel as if they were immersed in an invisible waterfall, almost suffocating. There were even a few weaker cultivators who half knelt on the ground, unable to stand up. Nie Tian, you've come with ill intent. Wan Minghai's calm face turned slightly serious as he said in a deep voice. Yes. Nie Tian nodded his head. After which, He took a step forward as the astral energy within his body surged forth. Boundless astral light rose from the ground, forming a gigantic astral net in the air, forcibly resisting the pressure from above. Sky-shrouding totem. Wan Minghai could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw this scene. He was extremely shocked. The force that Nye Tian had unleashed made him feel slightly threatened. Also, Nye Tian was way too ferocious. He was able to resist the combined aura of thousands of cultivators all by himself. So you are Nye Tian, fighting against 1,000 by yourself. How bold! At that moment a figure descended from the sky. His steps were soft and gentle, and his figure was graceful. He was tall and slender, but his voice was a bit deep. It's him. Wan Minghai raised his head and locked his gaze onto the tall and slender figure. He immediately confirmed that the powerful aura he felt earlier was from this person. However, this person's figure and appearance resembled that of a woman, which Wan Minghai didn't expect. You are also from the Three Extremes sect. Come at me together. Nye Tian looked at the person. Although they were separated by tens of thousands of meters, he could clearly feel his opponent's powerful aura. However, he wasn't afraid at all and directly shouted in a low voice. Ha ha! The person looked at Nye Tian and chuckled. He said loudly, I am the vice sect leader of the Three Extremes sect, Ouyang Changa. Why would I bully a junior like you? Vice sect leader. Wan Minghai's gaze sank when he heard the name. He was a little shocked. He originally thought that Ouyang Changa would be the sect leader of the Three Extremes sect, but he was only a vice sect leader. However, Ouyang Changa's aura shocked Wan Minghai. He estimated that Ouyang Changa's battle prowess was comparable to the immortal venerables of the Divine Qi continent. If a vice sect leader was already so powerful, then how powerful would the sect leader of the Three Extremes sect be? Furthermore, the Three Extremes sect was only a major force in the heavenly martial sacred world. If it was compared to the entire all-heaven sacred world, it would probably be insignificant. In comparison, the difference between the Divine Qi continent and the all-heaven sacred world was unimaginably huge. If you are really magnanimous, why would you be so ruthless toward the Heavenly Martial Association? Nye Tianling laughed with a disdainful gaze. No matter how one looked at it, Ouyang Changa did not look like a magnanimous person. He was just putting on a nice front. We're just serving our respective masters. Ouyang Changa smiled faintly and said, Nye Tian, although this is the first time I've seen you, I've long heard of your name. Today, if you can remain standing under the pressure of thousands of level 3 martial artists, I'll let you go. There's nothing in this world that can suppress me. Nye Tian's gaze was as sharp as a blade. He was extremely determined. Very well. The corner of Ouyang Changa's mouth twitched. He then said loudly, Open the formation. Formation? Wan Minghai's expression instantly changed when he heard the word. He could feel that Nye Tian was about to reach his limit after enduring the pressure of thousands of people. It should be known that most of the level 3 martial artists in the sky were Tianjue's sacred emperors, and there were even many sky martial sacred ancestors. It was easy to imagine how powerful the combined aura of so many martial artists would be. How could Nye Tian withstand such a terrifying pressure with the help of the formation? Bring it on. However, Nye Tian didn't fear them in the slightest. He let out a bellow, causing mountains and rivers to shake. The heaven-engulfing totem around him to expand rapidly, forcing the several thousand people to back off simultaneously. Looks like I've underestimated you. Ouyang Changa's gaze froze and he smiled coldly. He admitted that Nye Tian's strength had exceeded his expectations. However, that didn't change anything. As long as the 1,000 Revolution formation was opened, even if Nye Tian was at the peak of the sky martial realm, he would be suppressed by the formation. As soon as Ouyang Changa finished speaking, thousands of martial artists of the Three Extremes sect moved. Their figures kept changing in the sky. Apparently, they were following some kind of formation. At the same time, their aura started to grow stronger. After they joined forces, their aura increased visibly. It was as if their aura had doubled in an instant. Immediately, Nye Tian felt an enormous pressure bearing down on him, causing his body to sway slightly, and his feet to sink into the ground. Nye Tian, today is your doomsday. Ouyang Chang'e locked his cold gaze on Nye Tian and his lips curled into a sinister smile. Chapter 46-47. Deputy Sect Leader Ouyang Chang'e's eyes were filled with murderous intent. At the same time, he looked like a hunter enjoying the final struggle of his prey. In the distance, Wan Minghai felt the sudden increase in pressure in the void. He looked at Nye Tian anxiously. Nye Tian would have been able to withstand the pressure from before. However, he might not be able to do so now. More terrifyingly, the pressure in the void continued to increase, showing no signs of stopping. If this went on, it wouldn't be long before Nye Tian would be crushed to death by the pressure. Lord Nye Tian. The others also felt the change in the void. They looked at Nye Tian. Many of them began to panic. Do you think you can make me submit with such power? Nye Tian suddenly raised his head. His eyes were like sharp blades that locked onto Ouyang Chang'e from afar. Ancient celestial demon inscriptions began to appear at the corners of his eyes. Ouyang Chang'e's eyes darkened. Even though he was far away, he could feel the terrifying aura of the ancient celestial demon inscriptions. However, he sneered and said calmly, Hidden Dragon Marshal Nye Tian, you do have some tricks up your sleeve. Unfortunately, even if you are a martial legend, you will still be defeated in front of the 1000 Revolution Array of the Three Extremes sect. 1000 Revolution Array Immortal, rise. As soon as he finished his sentence, thousands of martial artists from the Three Extremes sect shouted in unison. Suddenly, the power in the void began to condense rapidly, transforming into golden runes that merged into one in the air. What a mysterious formation power! Wan Minghai could not help but exclaim when he saw this. As an immortal, he did not know much about the martial path. However, regardless of whether it was the immortal path or the martial path, the array immortal path had the same effect. Although the 1000 Revolution Array was a martial path array, he could see the true mysteries of the array immortal path. The array runes of the 1000 Revolution Array had far exceeded Wan Minghai's expectations. However, this put Nye Tian in even more danger. Fiend God Body, activate! At the same time, Nye Tian let out a low roar. Like a raging beast, the demonic and fiend god energy around him soared into the sky. His tremendous momentum seemed to break through the shackles of heaven and earth. Boom! The collision of the two boundless energies immediately caused the surrounding space to tremble violently. Even the ground trembled, causing everyone to feel as if the heavens and earth were about to collapse in the next moment. Under the protection of the heaven shrouding totem, everyone was relatively safe. But when they saw Nye Tian struggling to hold on, they couldn't help but panic. If Nye Tian couldn't hold on any longer, then what awaited them was death. What a stubborn brat! If you don't die today, you'll definitely be a huge problem for my Three Extremes sect in the future. Ouyang Chang'e stared at Nye Tian, his eyes filled with killing intent. At the same time, the runes in the void continued to converge and gradually condensed into a huge human figure. Array God of All Revolution. All Revolution Array God will be completed soon. Ouyang Chang'e looked at the All Revolution Array God in the sky. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He said coldly, I'd like to see if you still have the strength to resist under the power of the All Revolution Array God. Nye Tian activated the Fiend God Body to resist the All Revolution Array. Even with the support of the Heaven Shrouding Totem, he consumed a lot of energy and slowly couldn't hold on. Seeing this, Wan Minghai frowned, wondering if he should help. But he had been paying attention to Ouyang Chang'e. The latter was obviously on guard. If Wan Minghai helped Nye Tian now, It was equivalent to putting himself under the control of the all-revolution array. Then Xuedeshang would be in great danger. After thinking for a moment, Wan Minghai finally suppressed his impulse and didn't help. Vaguely, he had a hunch that Nye Tian would definitely be able to resist the all-revolution array. All-revolution array god, activate! At this time, thousands of level 3 martial artists shouted in unison. The all-revolution array god in the void finally condensed. It turned out to be a golden giant thousands of meters tall. Boom! The moment the all-revolution array god was activated, a powerful aura spread out, sweeping everything in its path. Wan Minghai's eyes narrowed, and the immortal force around his body slightly surged, protecting Xuedeshang. Bang bang bang! But at the same time, the heaven-shrouding totem couldn't bear the impact. Cracks appeared on it, and they continued to spread. In the blink of an eye, it was on the verge of collapsing. It's over! Seeing that the giant starlight net above their heads was about to be destroyed, everyone's heart sank. Many people had despair on their faces. Nye Tian, you finally can't hold on anymore. Ouyang Chang'e saw this and sneered. Nye Tian's strength was indeed far beyond his expectation. But unfortunately, under the all-revolution array, no matter how heaven-defying one was, he would eventually be defeated and killed. The people of level 3 in the sky looked at the figure on the ground who was still struggling to hold on, and each of them showed joy. They seemed to have seen the scene of Nye Tian being crushed by the all-revolution array god in an instant. Demonic eye, activate! God's punishment, activate! But at this moment, Nye Tian raised his head again and shouted in a low voice. A strange light appeared in his eyes, and suddenly the power of his eyes flowed through his body, instantly enhancing the power of the fiend god body. Boom! The next moment, outside of Nye Tian's body, a dark shadow several meters high appeared. It was the fiend god's real body. The fiend god's real body was activated again, and the power of the fiend god soared into the sky. Boom! The violent power of darkness condensed into a dark force, like a raging dragon, against the sky, and rushed straight to the all-revolution array god. Boom! 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 The power of the fiend god could destroy heaven and earth. Wherever it passed, everything was destroyed. Moreover, the devouring power was so strong that even the all-revolution array god couldn't resist it. In an instant, the all-revolution array god had not yet stood firm, and it was directly smashed by the power of the fiend god. One after another, the all-revolution array god dispersed, and in the blink of an eye, it was swallowed by the power of the fiend god. The power of darkness became bigger and bigger, and soon it became a giant pillar of darkness, like a giant dark snake suspended in the sky. This is... Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Ouyang Chang'e was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air, and was speechless for a while. He didn't think that the all-revolution array god, who suppressed everything in his eyes, would be directly defeated by Nye Tian. As for the dark energy, it was terrifying to the extreme. Its boundless aura seemed as if it was going to devour everything. Thousands of 3 extreme sex martial artists were also shocked by the sudden change in front of them. Each and every one of them was dumbfounded and completely speechless. Boom boom boom! At this time, the power of darkness surged in all directions, and the terrifying power was released, and the invisible momentum in the void was broken one after another. Boom! Finally, after a moment, the combined momentum of thousands of martial artists could no longer hold on, and burst out with a loud bang, turning into a boundless violent force, surging in all directions. At the same time, Nye Tian raised his head, and his eyes were as dark as the abyss. He was like a demon from hell, and his killing intent was boundless. If you want to talk about Eternal Celestial Emperor with more like-minded people, follow You Read Literature on WeChat, chat about life and find confidant. Chapter 46-48. In the sky, Ouyang Changa saw Nye Tian's eyes and sensed the murderous intent in them. He couldn't help but shiver. He couldn't hide the fear on his face. However, he was a sky martial arts divine ancestor after all. He calmed down and thought to himself, no matter how strong he is only a level 2 sky awakening realm cultivator. I am a level 7 sky martial arts divine ancestor. Why should I be afraid of him? At the same time, the people of the Sky Martial Arts Association were also stunned by Nye Tian's murderous intent. They looked at him as if they had been petrified. They couldn't imagine that Nye Tian, who was so young and did not have a high cultivation, could have such a terrifying murderous intent. Kill! At this moment, Nye Tian shouted. Endless murderous intent spread out from his body. The divine demon force surged crazily. Like a wild beast, he shot up into the sky and rushed into the thousands of martial artists of the Three Extremes sect. The martial artists of the Three Extremes sect were already frightened when their joint chi was broken. When they saw Nye Tian's chi, they panicked and fled in all directions. Nye Tian was like a hot knife through butter. Wherever he went, he destroyed everything in his way. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of martial artists of the Three Extremes sect were killed. The air was filled with the smell of blood. Nye Tianling stood in the sky. The divine demon force around him was like a bottomless abyss that could swallow everything. Is he a human or a ghost? Isn't he only a level 2 sky awakening realm cultivator? How can he be so strong? What kind of power is he using? He can swallow the array pattern. The people of the Three Extremes sect looked at Nye Tian from afar and discussed among themselves. They didn't dare to get any closer. Only Ouyang Changa managed to maintain his composure. His eyes were fixed on Nye Tian, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. He had thought that after destroying the Sky Martial Arts Association, the rest would be easy. He didn't expect that Nye Tian would appear out of nowhere. He even had the illusion that Nye Tian was more difficult to deal with than the Red Life Loyal Essence. Are you still not going to attack? At this moment, Nye Tian suddenly turned around. His eyes were cold and filled with killing intent. He directly locked onto Ouyang Changa, full of provocation. Arrogant. Ouyang Changa was, after all, an expert of a region, yet he was looked down upon by a junior. He was immediately enraged. With a low roar, he took a step forward, and a dragon-shaped spear appeared in his hand. In an instant, his aura surged and spread in all directions. In the blink of an eye, clumps of scarlet sand appeared around Ouyang Changa's body. It was like a sky full of blood, filling the void and covering everything. Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he sneered. Is this all you've got? Courting death. Ouyang Changa shouted in a low voice. Thousands of miles of raging sand spear pierced out. The spear surged forward like a dragon, swirling up endless scarlet-red sand. It filled the air, wanting to devour everything. Nye Tian was not afraid in the slightest. The sky sword slashed across the sky, and the sword wave was vast and mighty, suppressing everything. Bang! The spear and the sword clashed. The void around them couldn't help but tremble, as if it was about to collapse. The next moment, the scarlet sand in the air whistled crazily. Each tiny grain of sand was like a sharp blade in the air. The sharpness of the sand tore through everything. Nye Tian immediately felt that something was wrong. He frowned and retreated. His demonic and divine energy surged around him, resisting the erosion of the yellow sand. But the scarlet sand was extremely evil. It actually penetrated his demonic and divine energy. It was like maggots on bones, invading Nye Tian's body. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian was enveloped by the scarlet sand. Then, an endless amount of scarlet sand condensed and formed a huge ball of sand, trapping him in the center. Lord Nye Tian. When the people of the Tianwu continent saw this, they couldn't help but take a deep breath. They panicked. Was Nye Tian going to be buried in Ouyang Changa's scarlet sand just like that? Nye Tian, you are indeed very strong. It's a pity that you're too young. Ouyang Changa looked at the huge ball of sand in front of him and smiled eerily. My burial of blood sand. Even a cultivator at the peak of the Tianwu continent will die if he falls into it. It's not an unjust death for you to die in my burial of blood sand. Burial of blood sand was Ouyang Changa's natural bloodline skill. The bloodline power of the Ouyang family was a different kind of blood sand. But the bloodline power of the blood sand was extremely difficult to awaken. It required a cultivator to consume a red soil called corrosive sand when they were young to stimulate the bloodline power. The formation of corrosive sand was extremely cruel and bloody. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was condensed from flesh and blood. Corrosive sand was a very ordinary red soil, but it had an extremely special property: devouring flesh and blood. Corrosive sand could devour the flesh and blood of living people, absorb the power and nutrients in it, and transform it into its own power. It was rumored that for every kilogram of corrosive sand to form, tens of thousands of lives had to be sacrificed. When the Ouyang family awakened the power of the blood sand, everyone had to consume dozens or even hundreds of kilograms of corrosive sand since they were young. It was also because of the stimulation of the corrosive sand that the power of the blood sand became so terrifying. Not only could the power of the blood sand condense into blood sand, but it also perfectly inherited the ability of corrosive sand to devour flesh and blood. Moreover, the power of the blood sand was hundreds and thousands of times stronger than the corrosive sand. It was no exaggeration to say that the power of the blood sand could turn a Tianwu divine ancestor into a pile of bones in the blink of an eye. Ouyang Changa was very afraid of Nie Tian, so he used his bloodline skill without holding anything back. He wanted to turn Nie Tian into a pile of bones. Oh my God, this is the power of the blood sand of the Ouyang family. Isn't Lord Nie Tian dead for sure? Someone who had heard of the power of the blood sand could not help but exclaim, and his face turned pale. Being trapped in the burial of blood sand, even if it was Nie Tian, it would be difficult for him to escape. There's something strange about the blood sand. Wan Minghai also sensed the terrifying power contained in the blood sand. He could not help but frown as his expression turned ugly. Even though he was very confident in Nie Tian, he couldn't help but panic at this moment. If he were to be trapped in the burial of blood sand, the chance of him leaving alive would be less than a tenth. On the other hand, Nie Tian was still young, and his cultivation was not high enough. How was he going to leave the burial of blood sand? I can't care so much. I'll save Nie Tian first. Wan Minghai could not help but turn around and look at Xue Desheng next to him. He made up his mind and gathered his immortal force. He was about to make a move. Even though Nie Tian had said that he would only protect Xue Desheng, he could not care less about that now that the situation was dire. He had come to the all-heaven sacred world because of Nie Tian. If Nie Tian died, what was the point of coming to the all-heaven sacred world? Boom! However, when Wan Minghai was about to make his move, the giant ball of blood sand in the sky suddenly trembled in a strange manner. Wan Minghai could not help but frown. He probed with his divine sense, and his eyes were filled with joy. He could sense Nie Tian's aura from the ball of blood sand. Chapter 46-49. Wan Minghai was overjoyed when he sensed Nie Tian's aura in the blood sand. If his aura was still there, it meant that Nie Tian was still alive. However, in the next moment, Wan Minghai's expression suddenly changed. A look of astonishment appeared on his face. He couldn't believe that Nie Tian's aura was getting stronger. Since the blood sand had the ability to devour flesh power, even if Nie Tian was able to resist the blood sand's power, his aura should be getting weaker and weaker. How could it be getting stronger and stronger? When Ouyang Changa saw the ball of blood sand move, his originally relaxed face immediately froze. He was extremely surprised. It seemed that Nie Tian hadn't died in the blood sand burial, but how was that possible? The blood sand burial was powerful enough to kill an expert at the peak of the Tian Qi realm. How could Nie Tian, who was only at the level 2 of the heaven perception realm, resist the power of the blood sand? Bang! While Ouyang Chang'e was still in shock, the blood sand burial suddenly made a muffled sound. Then, a huge crack appeared on the surface of the blood sand, as if there was a force trying to rush out from within. How is that possible? Ouyang Chang'e's eyes narrowed. He couldn't help but exclaim. Could it be that Nie Tian was still alive? At the same time, the martial artists of the Three Extremes sect who had retreated far away also noticed that something was wrong. Why is there a crack in the blood sand burial? Is he still alive? Impossible. The blood sand burial is Deputy Ouyang's bloodline skill. Even an expert at the peak of the Tian Qi realm might not be able to resist it. No matter how strong he is, he can't be as strong as an expert at the peak of the Tian Qi realm. He can even devour the All-Revolution formation. Maybe he can devour the power of the blood sand too? The people of the Three Extremes sect discussed in low voices. Many of them looked panicked and didn't dare to look away from the blood sand burial. Bang! 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 At that moment, another muffled sound was heard. A huge crack appeared on the blood sand burial. It was about to break. When Sanji and the others saw this scene, they couldn't help but gasp in unison. Many of them couldn't help but retreat. Who would have thought that even Ouyang Chang'e's burial of blood sand could not trap Nie Tian? Sword Qi. Ouyang Chang'e's eyes were downcast, and his face was already extremely ugly. He could feel that there was an extremely strong sword Qi in the ball of blood sand. It was rapidly expanding, and was about to break out of the blood sand prison. This was the first time someone had broken through the imprisonment of the blood sand since he had awakened the burial of the blood sand. Before this, he had never imagined that there would be someone in this world who could break through his blood sand burial. Bang! At this moment, the ball of blood sand could no longer hold on and shattered with a loud bang. The crimson blood sand dispersed like a blood mist that filled the sky, and the smell of blood permeated the surroundings. It was as if the world was bathed in blood. After that, a figure shot into the sky amidst the bloody sand that covered the sky. Sword energy surged around him, and he seemed like a god of the sword that had descended to the world. Lord Nie Tian, it's Lord Nie Tian. The people of the Sky Martial Continent saw the figure's appearance clearly, and they all exclaimed in shock. Nie Tian had really broken out of the burial of blood sand. How is this possible? Of course, the person who was the most shocked was Ouyang Chang'e. He growled and his face was livid. Even though he was already mentally prepared, when Nie Tian really broke out, he still could not believe it. Ouyang Chang'e, your blood meridian power is stained with too much innocent blood. Nie Tian's eyes were as deep as the abyss, and he said in a deep voice, "Now I will return all that blood to you." The moment he finished speaking, two bright red rays shot out of Nie Tian's eyes. Like arrows leaving a bow, they attacked Ouyang Chang'e at an extremely fast speed. Ouyang Chang'e was stunned at first, and then he sensed something. His expression changed, and he quickly retreated. But unfortunately, it was too late. The bright red rays suddenly bloomed in the sky. The bright red light was like the setting sun, and it covered half the sky. Ouyang Chang'e was directly enveloped by the red light, and he immediately felt the blood meridian power in his body become restless. His ears were filled with thousands of cries, like the cries of the innocent people who died because of the blood sand power. Ouyang Chang'e could not withstand the restlessness of the blood meridian power in his body. His entire body felt like it was about to be torn apart, and he immediately started screaming. When the people of the Three Extremes sect saw this, their expressions changed in fear. What's wrong with sect leader Ouyang? I don't know. That kid seems to have done something to sect leader Ouyang, and he can't control himself. Where did this kid come from? How can he be so powerful? They could not imagine that Nye Tian could break out of the burial of blood sand with his stage 2 heavenly enlightenment realm cultivation, and he could even injure Ouyang Changa. Ouyang Changa, did you know that in the blood sand, I clearly heard the cries of the innocent people before they died? Nye Tian stared coldly at Ouyang Changa and said coldly, their flesh and blood were corroded by the corrosive sand, and they watched helplessly as they turned into human bones. Shouldn't you have a taste of such pain? Nye Tian, you can't kill me. Ouyang Changa's ears were filled with cries, and he felt like he had fallen into an endless purgatory. But he still retained his last shred of consciousness and spoke with difficulty. I can't kill you? Nye Tian laughed coldly and said, not only will I kill you today, but I will also guarantee that you will taste the same pain as those who died because of the blood sand. I am from the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. Ouyang Changa felt like his body was being torn apart. His body felt like it was being bitten by countless insects, and his blood, flesh, and meridians were being devoured bit by bit. Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. Nye Tian's eyes darkened when he heard those words, and he said coldly, no wonder the Triple Extremes sect was able to destroy the Heaven Martial Association in such a short period of time. It was all because of the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. Actually, from the moment he heard that the Heaven Martial Association was destroyed, Nye Tian had suspected that there was someone behind the Triple Extremes sect. And the first person he suspected was the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. Now that Ouyang Changa had personally admitted that he was from the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion, it was equivalent to admitting that the Triple Extremes sect was backed by the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion. Since you are from the Heaven Dao Sacred Pavilion, then you deserve to die even more. In the next moment, Nye Tian's eyes were filled with murderous intent. After he spoke, his eyes turned a strange blood-red color. This was the first time Nye Tian's eyes had turned blood-red. The power of the blood sand caused his celestial demon eyes to change. Ouyang Changa instantly felt the red light entering his body, and his flesh and blood were being devoured rapidly. He wanted to resist, but his body was no longer under his control. He subconsciously looked down and saw that the clothes on his body had caved in and were dyed blood red. It turned out that all his flesh and skin had been devoured, and only his bones were left. Chapter 46:50. Up in the sky, Ouyang Changa was shrouded in a crimson light. As for his body, it had already been completely devoured, leaving behind only a set of human bones. At this moment, he truly felt how horrible it was to have his flesh and blood devoured. To others, the whole process only took a few seconds, but to Ouyang Changa, it felt as long as 100 years. He finally experienced the pain of those who had died in the blood sand before they died. Watching his flesh and blood being devoured, the helplessness and despair would be unimaginable if he had not experienced it himself. Ouyang Changa felt as if he had fallen into a bottomless abyss. No matter how he struggled, he could not escape. What was more terrifying was that everything in front of him seemed to be endless and would go on forever. Not far away, Nye Tian's eyes were dark. His crimson eyes were like the eyes of a wolf in the dark night. The next moment, Nye Tian's eyes flickered. Suddenly, the crimson light exploded. It was extremely dazzling, like the red glow of the setting sun. Ouyang Changa, who was in the middle of the crimson light, was crushed into pieces. How could this be? The ghastly scene caused everyone's expression to change greatly, and they cried out in alarm. The deputy leader of Extreme 3, who was close to the peak of the sky martial arts realm, had been killed by Nye Tian. That was unacceptable. Just then, Nye Tian suddenly turned around and glanced at the people of Extreme 3. He said in a deep voice, "Next, it's your turn." Sensing the boundless killing intent surging towards them, Sanji and the others' expressions changed drastically as they panicked. "Run! This guy wants to kill us all. Let's go back and inform the leader. This guy is a monster. He's too scary." The people of Extreme 3 screamed and ran in all directions. Unfortunately, they could not escape at all. In the void, countless sword shadows fell like thousands of arrows, covering the sky and covering the earth, heading towards the people of Extreme 3. Wherever the sword shadows fell, there was blood everywhere. The sky and earth were dyed red. It was extremely tragic. After a long time, the blood in the sky gradually dissipated. Only one person was left in the sky, standing with a sword in his hand like a sword god. Below, the people of the Heaven Martial Association watched in a daze, unable to react for a long time. Who would have thought that Nye Tian, who was originally on the verge of death, would actually reverse everything in the blink of an eye and kill the three extremities? Even Wan Minghai took a long time to react. He had already sensed Nye Tian's aura, but he had not expected Nye Tian to be so powerful after breaking through the barrier of blood sand. At this moment, he even felt that he might not be able to win against Nye Tian. At this time, Nye Tian landed beside Wan Minghai. "Nye Tian, are you alright?" Wan Minghai felt that Nye Tian's breathing was a little unstable, so he quickly stepped forward and asked. "I'm fine." Nye Tian took a deep breath, and the redness in his eyes gradually faded. However, tears of blood flowed from the corners of his eyes. When he was in the barrier of blood sand earlier, his eyes had directly absorbed the power of the blood sand, allowing him to rush out. But Nye Tian did not know what kind of strange change had happened to his eyes that allowed him to devour the power of the blood sand and even make it his own. "It's good that you're fine." Wan Minghai breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Nye Tian's breathing had stabilized. The people of the Heaven Martial Association looked at Nye Tian with both gratitude and fear. It was true that Nye Tian had saved them, but the strength that Nye Tian had displayed made them extremely fearful. Nye Tian paid no attention to the crowd, and sat down cross-legged on the ground to begin recovering his strength. Several hours later, Xuedesheng finally opened the Tsangshuan gate. "This is..." Xuedesheng let out a long breath. When he turned his head and saw the corpses on the ground, his expression froze in shock. He had been so focused on opening the Tsangshuan gate that he had no idea what had happened. They're all from the Three Extremes sect. They were all killed by Nye Tian. Wan Minghai faintly smiled as he pointed at Nye Tian. How is this possible? Xuedesheng could not restrain the shock in his heart. Nye Tian was only at the second stage of the Heaven Perception realm. How could he have killed so many martial artists from the Three Extremes sect? Xuedesheng glanced at Wan Minghai, feeling that the latter must have helped. They were all killed by Nye Tian alone. The deputy sect master Ouyang Chang'e also died at Nye Tian's hand. Wan Minghai shook his head and smiled. Ouyang Chang'e. Xuedesheng once again let out a strange cry as he looked at Nye Tian in disbelief. "You killed Ouyang Chang'e?" "Yes." Nye Tian did not explain further and only nodded. "This..." Xuedesheng was completely shocked. His lips twitched uncontrollably, but he could not make a sound. Xuedesheng was very familiar with Ouyang Chang'e. How could someone like him die at the hands of Nye Tian? One must know that Ouyang Chang'e was not weak to begin with. Coupled with his extremely terrifying bloodline power, he was definitely one of the top figures in the heavenly martial sacred world. How could Xuedesheng believe that such a person had died at the hands of Nye Tian, who was only at the second stage of the Heaven Perception realm? However, the people of the Heaven Martial Association all nodded in agreement. Xuedesheng had no choice but to believe it. "Elder Xue, let's go in first." Nye Tian was worried that the people from the Three Extremes sect would come again. Yes, yes, yes. Only then did Xuedesheng return to his senses and nodded repeatedly. Under Xuedesheng's arrangements, the group entered the Tsangshuan land one after another. The moment they entered the Tsangshuan land, Nye Tian immediately felt an extremely mysterious aura in the air that gave him a very comfortable feeling. "Everyone, remember, you're here to seek refuge, not to cultivate. No one is allowed to touch anything here without my permission." Xue Desheng reminded the group again, still a little worried. Everyone nodded, but many of them could not help but observe their surroundings curiously. Wan Minghai was even more excited. His eyes flickered as if he had discovered a new world. Nie Tian did not feel anything. After all, he had been to too many secret and forbidden areas. Soon after, the group entered a valley under Xue Desheng's lead and began to rest. Nie Tian had more or less recovered. He came to Xue Desheng's side and said, "Elder Xue, there are some things I must know. Ask away." Xue Desheng already knew Nie Tian's identity and nodded. "Do you know where Senior Qi Ming is?" Nie Tian asked directly, not beating around the bush. "I don't know." However, Xue Desheng shook his head and said, "I only know that during the battle with the Three Extremes sect, Lord Guild Master was seriously injured and fled with his injuries. Did he leave alone?" Nie Tian's gaze darkened as he anxiously asked. "I heard that when the president escaped, he brought a child with him." Xue Desheng nodded as he recalled. Chapter 46-51. A child. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart had a child with him. Hearing Xue Desheng's words, Nie Tian's pupils constricted and he became excited. "Does that child have anything to do with Nie Tian?" Seeing Nie Tian's reaction, Xue Desheng couldn't help but frown. He remembered that the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart did have a child with him, and he had seen him several times. Now that he thought about it, the child's appearance was really similar to Nie Tian's. "Elder Xue, do you know where Senior Scarlet Life Loyal Heart went?" Nie Tian suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked in a serious tone. "I don't know." Xue Desheng shook his head and said, "Our president finally escaped. He should have left the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm." Nie Tian frowned. If the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart left the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm with Niefan, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack to find them. Although it would be safer for the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart to leave the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, Nie Tian still hoped that the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart was still in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, because it would be easier to find him. Although the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart escaped in the end, he must have been seriously injured in the battle, and he had a dying child with him. It was not hard to imagine how dangerous the situation was. "Elder Xue, according to your understanding of Senior Scarlet Life, if he is still in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm, where will he go?" Nie Tian asked after thinking for a while. "Well, it's hard to say." Xue Desheng frowned and thought for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "Maybe our president will go there." "Where?" Nie Tian couldn't help but feel excited and asked hurriedly. "The Five Master Valley." Xue Desheng glanced around to make sure no one was eavesdropping, then he said a name. "Where is it?" Nie Tian's eyes were burning. Unconsciously, his heart was in his throat. The Five Kings Valley is a secret place of the Myriad Yuan Pavilion in the Heavenly Martial Sacred Realm. The president has a close relationship with the master of the Myriad Yuan Pavilion, Master Qing Qi. He once brought me to the Five Kings Valley. Xue Desheng said, "I remember that the president said that if one day something big happened to the Heaven Martial Association, the Five Direction King Valley would be their last refuge. In that case, Senior Scarlet Fate will most likely go to Five King Valley." Nie Tian didn't wait for Xue Desheng to continue and said in a deep voice, "The Five Direction King Valley was the territory of the 10,000 Yuan Pavilion, so there were bound to be many arrays protecting it. In addition, it was also very secretive. Relatively speaking, it was safer than escaping to another world." "Yes." Xue Desheng nodded his head and said, "It is very likely that President will go to the Five Direction King Valley. However, the Five Direction King Valley is thousands of miles away from the Heaven Martial City. Now that the entire Heavenly Martial Sacred Domain is controlled by the Three Extremes sect, it won't be easy for us to go to the Five Kings Valley. I want to go to the Five Direction King Valley, no one can stop me." The look in Nie Tian's eyes was firm, cold. "Nie Tian, if you really want to go, I'm willing to lead the way." But before that, we still need to stay in the Tsangshuan land for a while. Xue Deshang could feel an indomitable aura from Nie Tian. His eyes couldn't help but tremble as he said in a low voice. Why? Nie Tian frowned. He couldn't wait to set off for the Five-Direction King Valley right now. You're quite injured and haven't recovered yet. Xue Deshang's eyes darkened slightly. He paused for a moment before he said, Besides that, I still have some things to do in the Tsangshuan land. Nie Tian frowned. He could already tell that his injuries were secondary. The most important thing was what Xue Deshang wanted to do in the Tsangshuan land. But what exactly did Xue Deshang want to do? Why was it more important than finding the Scarlet Fate Pill Heart? The Tsangshuan land was one of the 4 great secret areas of the Heaven Martial Association. There must be some secrets hidden in it. Perhaps what Xue Deshang wanted to do was related to the secrets of the Tsangshuan land. Elder Xue, I'll tell you the truth. Nie Tian pondered for a moment before he said, The child that Senior Scarlet Fate brought is called Nie Fan. He's my son. Something happened to him and he's in danger. So I can't wait for too long. If you want to do something, please do it as soon as possible. Okay. Xue Deshang had already guessed this, so he wasn't too surprised. He sighed and said, What I want to do concerns the future of the Heaven Martial Association. I have no choice but to do it. Unfortunately, Yu Jingchen isn't here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so troublesome. Yu Jingchen is here. Nie Tian's eyes widened when he heard Xue Deshang mention Yu Jingchen. He then briefly explained how he had saved Yu Jingchen from the Sanji sect. Ask him to come out. I want to see if he's okay. Xue Deshang was extremely excited after hearing Nie Tian's story. Although Xue Deshang could tell that Nie Tian's talent in the Sword Dao was above Yu Jingchen's, in his eyes, Nie Tian wasn't a member of the Heaven Martial Association. Yu Jingchen, on the other hand, was a true member of the Heaven Martial Association. In his heart, Yu Jingchen was more important than Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded slightly and asked Yu Jingchen to come out from the 9 extremities. Mo Rushi also came out at the same time. Nie Tian, have you found Fan? Mo Rushi asked Nie Tian as soon as she came out. She had already heard from Yu Jingchen that the Heaven Martial Association had been annihilated. Although she was extremely anxious, she didn't want to affect Nie Tian, so she didn't come out. Rushi, don't worry. Senior Scarlet Fate and Fan are safe. I already know where they are. I'll go look for them soon. Nie Tian held Mo Rushi's trembling hand and comforted her. We'll go look for them now, right now. Mo Rushi didn't want to wait any longer. She couldn't wait to see her son. Miss Mo, calm down first. At this time, before Nie Tian could speak, Xue Deshang said, The President and the others are now in the secret place of the 10,000 yuan pavilion. Only the few of us know about this. If we go look for them now, it'll be the same as leading the 3 extremities sect there. It'll bring danger to them. This. Mo Rushi was already panicking. Hearing Xue Deshang's words, she became even more flustered. Tears fell uncontrollably from her eyes. Rushi, believe me. I'll definitely find Fan. Nie Tian gently hugged Mo Rushi and said in a heavy tone. Mo Rushi leaned against his broad chest and felt a surge of energy flowing through her body. She slowly calmed down. Yu Jingchen, how are you? After comforting Mo Rushi, Nie Tian looked at Yu Jingchen and asked, Thank you, Brother Nie, for saving my life. Yu Jingchen's face was solemn. He first bowed deeply to Nie Tian before saying, Thanks to Lord Chinchilla's care, I've already recovered a lot. Nie Tian nodded. Feeling Yu Jingchen's aura, he was still a little worried. Fat Cat's methods were mysterious. She had pulled Yu Jingchen back from the gates of hell. However, Yu Jingchen's injuries were too severe. He had only recovered by 10% to 20%. With Yu Jingchen's current condition, it would take him a few days to recover more than half of his strength. What Xue Deshang wanted to do next was to rely on Yu Jingchen. Wouldn't that take a long time? Chapter 46-53. This was not the first time Yu Jingchen had entered the profound sword tomb, but he had failed every time. This time, with Nie Tian accompanying him, he was confident. Yes. Xue Desheng nodded and looked at Nie Tian. He seemed worried. The power of the profound communication sword intent was beyond imagination. To a cultivator, especially a swordsman, the profound communication sword intent was extremely tempting. Could Nie Tian resist it? Nie Tian could tell that Xue Desheng was worried, but he only smiled and did not say anything. However, the profound communication lake surprised Nie Tian. He could feel that the entire lake was enveloped by a boundless sword intent. It was as if the entire lake was an abyss of sword intent. Following that, Nie Tian and Yu Jingchen made some preparations before jumping into the profound insight lake. Plop! The two of them fell into the lake at the same time. The moment they entered the lake, Nie Tian felt an oppressive sword intent that made it hard for him to breathe. He steadied himself, took a few deep breaths, and finally calmed down. The profound communication lake is filled with an extremely strong sword intent. Ordinary people will feel an extremely strong sword intent when they enter. They will need some time to get used to it, Yu Jingchen said as he looked at Nie Tian. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. He could feel the pressure on his chest lessen. He did not expect the sword intent in the lake to be so strong. Let's go to the sword tomb, Yu Jingchen said after seeing that Nie Tian had gotten used to it. The two of them moved quickly towards the profound communication sword tomb. Along the way, Nie Tian could clearly feel that the sword intent in the surroundings was getting stronger. However, the sword intent pressure was getting weaker. About half an hour later, a dark body of water appeared in front of them. They could faintly hear the humming of a sword. This is the entrance to the sword tomb. Yu Jingchen pointed at the dark body of water and said, "Follow behind me. Just be careful." Nie Tian nodded and followed closely behind Yu Jingchen. When the two of them entered the dark waters, Nie Tian immediately heard the whistling sound of sword qi. The sharpness was deafening. This seems to be an abandoned sword formation. It has been damaged to such an extent, but the sword qi still has such power. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he was shocked. The sword formation was already extremely damaged, but the might of the sword qi didn't diminish at all. It could be inferred from this that the sword formation was definitely extremely powerful when it was in perfect condition. Yu Jingchen was obviously very familiar with the path. He charged left and right through the broken sword formation and was about to reach the end. Swoosh! However, at this moment, the sound of something tearing through the air rang out in front of him. It was a sword shadow that cut through the layers of waves and slashed over. Yu Jingchen was clearly a little surprised, but he still unsheathed the startling dust in his hand and released a burst of sword qi, easily dispelling the sword shadow attack. "Are you all right?" Nie Tian was also shocked, and he couldn't help but ask when he saw Yu Jingchen's stunned expression. "I'm fine." Yu Jingchen shook his head, but he frowned and said doubtfully, "The last few times I entered the sword tomb, I was only attacked by sword qi at most. I've never encountered such an attack. It is indeed a little strange." Nie Tian's eyes also grew slightly grim as he muttered, "This is a sword formation that has been broken for a long time." However, even though that sword shadow wasn't very powerful, it was full of sword intent, and its attack seemed to be aimed at us. It didn't seem like a sword formation at all. Instead, it seemed like someone was controlling it. Yu Jingchen looked at Nie Tian and nodded. He had the same feeling in his heart, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. However, as far as he knew, the Tongxian sword tomb was just a sword tomb. Although there were many sword formations and restrictions, there would definitely be no people in it. The sword shadow just now made this trip into the sword tomb a little more treacherous. "Let's go in first." Yu Jingchen thought about it and decided to enter the sword tomb first. Nie Tian nodded and the two of them left the sword formation and entered the real sword tomb. The moment they entered the sword tomb, Nie Tian immediately felt that the sword essence aura in the surrounding space had completely changed. Previously, although the sword essence aura was strong, it was very chaotic and there was no pattern to it. Now, the sword essence aura was even stronger and it was very orderly, as if it was operating in a certain order. This sword tomb is not simple. It's completely different from the sword tombs I've seen before. Nie Tian said with a frown as he looked at the countless broken swords and the sword essence whirlpool in the air. He had seen many sword tombs in the past, but compared to the Tong Xian sword tomb, there was a huge difference. The other sword tombs were mostly chaotic and the sword essence and sword qi clashed with each other, which was very dangerous. However, the sword tomb in front of him was very orderly, giving people the feeling that this sword tomb was alive. I also feel that something is wrong. It seems that the sword tomb is a little different from the previous times I've been here. Yu Jingchen also frowned and looked puzzled. He indeed felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what was wrong. Let's enter the sword tomb first. Nie Tian's eyes flickered slightly and there was a flash of light in them. Yu Jingchen agreed and then his figure moved, like a ray of light, into the sword tomb. Nie Tian also followed closely. Wherever he passed, he could feel that the sword essence in the surrounding void was moving away, as if it was afraid of him. Huh! Yu Jingchen stood still and could feel the strange changes that were happening around Nie Tian. He could not help but feel puzzled. He had entered the sword tomb many times, but he had never seen such a strange situation. The sword essences in the sword tomb were left behind by the strongest swordsmen in the ancient times. The sword essences in the sword tomb were so high that they were far superior to the current swordsmen. The sword essences in the sword tomb would only dodge when there was a huge gap between the sword essences. At this moment, the sword essences in the sword tomb were obviously avoiding Nie Tian. This undoubtedly meant that Nie Tian's sword essences were far superior to the sword essences in the sword tomb. This was too terrifying. When Yu Jingchen first met Nie Tian, he thought that the latter's sword principal realm was higher than his, but his sword essences were not as good as his. After all, he was someone who possessed the innate sword embryo. However, what happened later made him understand that Nie Tian's sword essences were no weaker than his. In fact, they were even stronger than his. At this moment, the sword essences in the sword tomb were avoiding his sword essences, which undoubtedly showed that Nie Tian's sword essences were stronger than his. Just as Yu Jingchen was shocked and puzzled, an unexpected change happened again. In the sword tomb, countless broken swords broke out of the ground and floated in the void, as if they had been summoned. Huh? What's going on? Yu Jingchen was shocked. He could feel that every nameless sword was releasing a huge sword essences, as if it was some kind of sword formation ceremony. Nie Tian was also puzzled. He felt an inexplicable restlessness in his body, as if the sword essences were about to break out of his body. Chapter 46-54. Nie Tian frowned as he felt the sudden and inexplicable agitation in his body. He looked slightly nervous. He had experienced similar agitation in the past, but it had never been as strong as it was now. At this moment, he felt as if every strand of sword intent in his body was about to boil and burn. However, it did not make him feel any discomfort. Instead, he felt a strange surge of blood. At the same time, countless broken swords began to fly in the air, constantly releasing a huge amount of sword intent. In the blink of an eye, the sword intent in the entire sword catacomb had become several times stronger. Yu Jingchen was stunned by the scene in front of him and was momentarily speechless. He had come to the sword catacomb several times, but had never seen such a situation. Vaguely, he felt that the strangeness of the day had something to do with Nie Tian. After a while, Nie Tian felt that the agitation of the sword intent in his body had reached an unprecedented level. The surging feeling made him almost lose control of his body. Buzz. Immediately, the sound of a sword rang out. In the depths of the sword catacomb, a vast sword intent broke through the ground and suddenly condensed in the air. It turned into a whirlpool of sword intent, constantly releasing mighty sword intent chi in all directions. Nie Tian looked at the whirlpool of sword intent that had suddenly appeared and could not help but narrow his eyes. He could see that there seemed to be a sword shadow in the whirlpool of sword intent. Although it was not big, it gave off an extremely sharp feeling. This is... Yu Jingchen also noticed the strange sword shadow in the whirlpool. He could not help but narrow his eyes in shock. That small sword shadow could not be the mysterious sword intent that he had been looking for, right? Could it be that the mysterious sword intent that the Heaven Martial Association had been searching for countless years had directly appeared because of Nie Tian? Thinking of this, Yu Jingchen's eyes trembled and he looked at Nie Tian. Even though he did not have any doubts about Nie Tian, what if the mysterious sword intent was determined to be Nie Tian? Nie Tian, that is the mysterious sword intent that you are looking for. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded in Nie Tian's divine sense. It was anxious and excited. Yes. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he nodded heavily. He believed Fat Cat's words without a doubt. Yu Jingchen, the sword shadow in the whirlpool is the profound enlightenment sword essence. Nie Tian's gaze sank slightly, and he forcefully suppressed the restless sword insight within his body as he spoke in a low voice. All right. Yu Jingchen agreed, and with a flash, he dashed towards the whirlpool of sword intent. However, at this moment, the surrounding broken swords actually gathered together and automatically formed a sword formation, protecting the sword intent of mystic enlightenment within it. Is this sword formation a test? Yu Jingchen's eyes darkened and he sneered. He unsheathed his startling sword and slashed it down. Sword shadows whizzed out and clashed against the sword formation. Boom! At the same time, the sword formation sensed something, and the sword chi acted on its own. The sword chi actually shattered the sword shadow, and an enormous sword pressure erupted from it, pressing down on Yu Jingchen. Yu Jingchen was caught off guard, and his body trembled as he was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood in midair. Yu Jingchen! When Nie Tian saw this, his figure flashed, and he caught Yu Jingchen firmly. I'm fine. Yu Jingchen steadied himself and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, but his face was a little pale. Although he had recovered some of his strength with Nie Tian's help, he was still far from his peak condition. At this moment, he was hit by the sword formation head-on, and his injuries were not light. Let me try this sword formation. Seeing that Yu Jingchen was about to attack again, Nie Tian stretched out his hand to stop him. He then held the sky sword in his hand, and without moving, he slashed at the sword formation. Boom! The sword shadow was like a mountain, majestic and powerful. However, when it landed on the sword formation, it was like a clay ox entering the sea, and there was not a single ripple. This sword formation is so strong. Nie Tian could not help but frown, and his expression was a little gloomy. He did not expect this sword formation, which was formed by countless broken swords in such a short period of time, to be so strong. Although he did not use his full strength, the sword formation still had the power to split mountains, but it did not shake it at all. Let me try. Yu Jingchen's blood boiled, and with a low roar, he used the Churn shocking 9 swords of 8 barren chaos again. As the sword slashed down, the space around it trembled, and it seemed like it could devour the heavens and earth. Rumble! However, when the sword fell, it did not cause much of a ripple, and it only shook the sword formation slightly. As for Yu Jingchen, he was sent flying again by the recoil. He steadied himself, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth again. Yu Jingchen, this sword formation is not simple, and it cannot be broken by brute force. Nie Tian supported Yu Jingchen and said in a deep voice as he looked at the sword formation. Yu Jingchen wiped away the blood and nodded. He was a little impulsive just now, and not only did he not shake the sword formation, but he also injured himself again. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he opened his demonic eye to see through the sword formation, and he immediately found something special. He saw that the runes in the sword formation were very orderly, and it was obvious that they were arranged according to a specific rule. The entire sword formation's movement eventually converged on the Elysium sword intent in the sword intent whirlpool at the center of the sword formation. The Elysium sword intent is the core of this sword formation. If we can't get close to the whirlpool, we won't be able to break the sword formation. Nie Tian immediately understood and said in a deep voice, "The Elysium sword intent is protected by the sword formation. How can we get close?" Yu Jingchen took a deep breath, and his complexion turned slightly better. Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he fell into deep thought. Indeed, the sword formation protected the Elysium sword intent, and the Elysium sword intent was the key to breaking the formation. As such, the sword formation and the Elysium sword intent were like a giant snake that had swallowed its own tail, and there was no way to break it. This sword formation looks simple, but it is actually very mysterious. The person who set it up is well versed in offense and defense. At that moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard again, and it said, "It seems like the person who left the Elysium sword intent behind is the same person." "Who?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he asked in surprise. Before entering the sword catacomb, Fat Cat had mentioned a person, and it had surprised Nie Tian. Now that Fat Cat had mentioned it again, it seemed like the person's identity had been confirmed. Progenitor Tong Xian. Fat Cat was silent for a while, and then he said a name. Progenitor Tong Xian. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he became excited. Since Fat Cat knew the person who left the Elysium sword intent behind, it should also know the way to break the sword formation. Progenitor Tong Xian was a sword Dao genius, and he existed longer than the Yang God Sword Emperor. Fat Cat was not in a hurry to say the way to break the formation, and instead, he talked about Progenitor Tong Xian. At that time, the sword Dao was not complete, and countless pioneer swordsmen were still trying to find a complete sword Dao system. And Progenitor Tong Xian was one of the founders of the sword Dao system. However, the sword Dao system he created was very different from the current sword Dao system. "It's very different." Upon hearing these words, Nie Tian's pupils involuntarily shrank. The current sword Dao system was infinitely perfect. However, Progenitor Tong Xian's sword Dao system was completely different from the current sword Dao system. That was interesting. Chapter 46-55. When Nie Tian heard that it was a completely different sword Dao system, he couldn't help but be shocked. He had lived 2 lives and cultivated the sword Dao for many years. His understanding of the sword Dao was not unparalleled in this world, but it was definitely among the top. In his opinion, at least in terms of his own comprehension of cultivation, the current sword Dao system was already close to perfection. Spirit Realm Sword Dao. Sword moves, sword arts, sword chi, sword heart, sword intent, sword force, sword spirit, sword soul, sword profundity, 10 great realms. Sword chi accumulates in the heart, sword heart condenses intent, sword intent gathers momentum, sword intent transforms into spirit, sword spirit transforms into soul, soul and spirit return to one, the profound meaning of the sword. Deity Realm Sword Dao. Sword vein, sword bone, sword essence, sword forgetting self, sword martial arts as one. Transcendence Realm Sword Dao. Transcendence Sword Soul, Transcendence Sword Body, Transcendence Profound Meaning. Saint Realm Sword Dao. Sword Rhythm, Divine Oracle, Sacred Meaning, Sword Heavenly Calamity, Sword Sense Against God, Sword Martial Saint. Of the 6 great sword realms, the first 3 were the mortal sage realm, and the last 3 were the paramount sage realm. The spirit realm, the divine realm, and the saint realm. The three major sword Tao systems were strict and compact. Almost every realm had a corresponding symbol, and they complemented each other. Such a system was almost perfect. It was the result of countless pioneers of the sword Tao spending a great deal of time and effort to finally form it. However, Fat Cat actually said that Patriarch Tong Xian cultivated another sword Tao system. How could Nie Tian not be surprised? At this moment, Fat Cat nodded heavily and said, Patriarch Tong Xian existed in the early days of the sword's path. He was one of the few who could be called the pioneer of the sword's path. Patriarch Profound Insight has contributed greatly to the current sword Tao system. Because he was born in the lowest plane of existence, he knew very well how difficult it was for a martial artist and a swordsman to cultivate. Therefore, through his own hard work, he almost single-handedly created the current Spirit Realm Sword Tao system. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed in agreement. Just like Patriarch Tong Xian, he had fought his way up from the lowest plane of existence. These martial practitioners who were born in realms or holy worlds found it very difficult to understand the difficulties of cultivation in other planes. Most of the martial practitioners were restricted by the world they lived in and could only remain in the spirit realm for the rest of their lives. For Nie Tian to be able to reach where he was today, in addition to his own strong talent and perseverance, luck and opportunities were also extremely important. Forefather Profundity's creation of the Spirit Realm Sword Tao system was equivalent to providing a path to the peak of the Sword Tao for all martial practitioners of this plane. One must know that progenitor Tongshuan's Spirit Realm Sword Tao system was almost seamlessly connected to the God Realm Sword Tao and Sage Realm Sword Tao. However, after Patriarch Tongshuan's Sword Tao reached the peak, he began to have doubts about the Sword Tao itself. After a while, Fat Cat continued, in his later years, Patriarch Tong Xian began to be obsessed with developing a brand new system of swordsmanship, a shortcut that was closer to the true meaning of swordsmanship. Shortcut? Upon hearing this term, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed in surprise. Whether it was the way of the sword or the way of the martial arts, they were all things that had to be accumulated over time. How could there be shortcuts? The path of cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current, and the difficulty of improving was obvious. Elder Profundity actually wanted to find a shortcut to the Sword Tao. He seemed to have lost his way. That's the shortcut. Fat Cat nodded heavily. Back then, everyone thought that Patriarch Tong Xian had gone mad. How could there be a shortcut to the way of the sword? A few of Patriarch Tongshuan's best friends persuaded him to give up on such a meaningless exploration. However, Patriarch Tong Xian was stubborn and abandoned his Sword Tao cultivation of millions of years in search of a new Sword Tao. At that point, Nie Tian's expression could not help but change as his heart skipped a beat. To think that Patriarch Tong Xian would be so determined to destroy his own Sword Tao foundation for a new Sword Tao. Back then, he was already at the peak of the way of the sword, yet he could give up so calmly. That state of mind alone was something that ordinary people could not compare to. What happened after that? Nie Tian asked excitedly, his eyes slightly trembling as his gaze became fervent. Patriarch Tong Xian abandoned his Sword Tao cultivation and isolated himself in Mount Xianhuang for tens of thousands of years. Fat Cat inhaled deeply and continued, because back then, Patriarch Tong Xian was at the end of his lifespan. Plus, he destroyed his own Sword Tao. He didn't have much left in his lifespan. Therefore, tens of thousands of years later, everyone thought that Patriarch Tong Xian had died in isolation in Mount Xianhuang. But Patriarch Tongshuan's few direct disciples didn't believe that their teacher had died. They continued to guard Mount Xianhuang. Just like that, tens of thousands of years passed and Patriarch Tong Xian still didn't make a move. Because of that, the few disciples couldn't wait any longer and left. Only the youngest direct disciple didn't forget his teacher's teachings and was willing to give up his life to guard Mount Xianhuang. Hearing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel a little moved. With Patriarch Tongshuan's name, if no one was guarding him, countless people would try to enter Mount Xianhuang to investigate. That direct disciple was willing to guard Mount Xianhuang with his life, showed his trust and respect for Patriarch Tongxian. Then, Fat Cat continued, tens of thousands of years later, when everyone had almost forgotten about Patriarch Tongxian, there was news of Patriarch Tongxian coming out of isolation in Mount Xianhuang. A few years later, a mysterious swordsman who cultivated the crafty sword Dao appeared. With a sword Dao that no one had ever seen before, he defeated hundreds of first-class swordsmen. Then, this crafty sword Dao swordsman declared that he would challenge all the swordsmen in the world. Some famous, or even disappeared, swordsmen appeared one after another, but they were all defeated by the crafty sword Dao. When the crafty sword Dao swordsman defeated all the swordsmen in the world, he revealed his identity. Wu Chuani. He was Patriarch Tongshuan's youngest direct disciple. What a crafty sword Dao! He defeated all the swordsmen in the world. Hearing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel his blood boil and his heart beat wildly. It was obvious that the crafty sword Dao was passed down by Patriarch Tongxian. The crafty sword Dao was only passed down to one person, and this person was able to defeat all the swordsmen in the world. This showed how powerful the crafty sword Dao was. That's right. Fat Cat nodded in agreement and said, "It's a pity that Patriarch Tongxian passed away after passing down the crafty sword Dao to Wu Chuani." Even though Wu Chuani proved the power of the crafty sword Dao with his own strength, he also incited the hatred of all the swordsmen in the world. After that, Wu Chuani was surrounded and rejected by the entire sword world. Even though he accepted disciples with the crafty sword Dao, there were only a few who were willing to be his disciples. As such, the invincible crafty sword Dao was buried in the torrent of history after Wu Chuani's death. Luckily, before Wu Chuani died, he left behind the mystic sword formation, which is the mystic sword tomb that you see before you. So that's how it is. Nie Tian let out a long sigh. His heart was in turmoil and he couldn't calm down for a long time. The crafty sword Dao was indeed shocking. But in the end it disappeared in such an absurd way. It was really sad. Luckily, the mystic sword tomb was left behind. Today might be the day that the crafty sword tomb reappeared in the world. Chapter 46-56. Nie Tian could not help but feel excited after hearing what Fat Cat said about the Tongxian sword tomb. He really wanted to know what was so special about the crafty sword doctrine that defeated all the swordsmen in the world. Fat, since you know so much about the Tongxian sword tomb, do you know how to break the formation? Nie Tian asked in a low voice as he suppressed the excitement in his heart. Fat Cat fell silent for a moment before saying, "The Tongxian sword array was left behind by Wu Chuani, and it contains the true meaning of the crafty sword doctrine. I do not know much about the crafty sword doctrine, so I can't tell where the sword array's weakness is." When Nie Tian heard little Fat Cat's words, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes, feeling a little disappointed. He had thought that he could learn how to break the formation from Fat Cat, but it seemed like he had been overthinking it. If he wanted to break the sword array, he had to rely on himself. Yu Jingchen looked at the sword array and did not speak for a long time. It was obvious that he was also thinking hard about how to break the formation. After a while, Nie Tian and Yu Jingchen stood up at the same time and smiled at each other. Then, both of them moved at the same time, one above and one below. Boom! Boom! Instantly, two sword shadows that were as majestic as mountains pressed down on the sword formation in an overwhelming manner. Both of them thought that they might be able to break the sword array if they attacked together at the same time. Unfortunately, when the two sword shadows hit the sword array only shook for a while before it returned to its original state. On the other hand, Nie Tian and Yu Jingchen were both sent flying by the recoil of the sword array. Nie Tian was fine as his martial body was strong, so he quickly stabilized himself. Yu Jingchen, on the other hand, was injured. Before he could stabilize himself, he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood, and his face became as pale as a piece of paper. Yu Jingchen, how are you? Nie Tian immediately came to Yu Jingchen's side and helped him to land on the ground. Yu Jingchen took a few deep breaths to stabilize the blood in his body. Nie Tian, I'm afraid we will have to return empty-handed again. Yu Jingchen looked at Nie Tian and let out a long sigh. The Tongxian sword formation was too strong, and it was almost invulnerable. With Nie Tian and Yu Jingchen's strength, it was impossible for them to break the formation. We've just arrived. How can we give up so easily? However, Nie Tian's gaze was resolute as he said with a faint smile, since ancestor Tongxian left behind the Tongxian sword intent, he naturally has to test the person who obtains the sword intent. If anyone can inherit the profound sword intent, doesn't it mean that the profound sword intent is useless? When Yu Jingchen heard those calm words, he felt as if his ears were about to explode. In Nie Tian's eyes, Yu Jingchen saw 4 words: never give up. Yu Jingchen was greatly moved. Perhaps the difference between him and Nie Tian was not in terms of talent, but in terms of temperament and willpower. In the face of such a desperate situation, Nie Tian did not feel the slightest bit disappointed. Instead, he was full of confidence. Such great willpower was the key to him being able to reach where he was today. Take a rest first. I want to see what's so special about this sword formation. Seeing that Yu Jingchen was moved, Nie Tian smiled faintly and let him rest first. Yu Jingchen's injuries were too severe, and letting him continue to come into contact with the sword formation would do him no good. Yu Jingchen agreed and sat down cross-legged, entering a state of cultivation. Nie Tian let out a long breath as he looked at the sword formation in front of him. His eyes shone with a strange light. Although he and Yu Jingchen did not cause any damage to the sword formation, they did not come out of it empty-handed. Nie Tian saw that when the 2 sword shadows landed, the huge impact had a strong pressure on the sword formation's sword inscriptions. It had also changed the direction of the sword inscriptions. This meant that the profound sword formation was not indestructible. It was just that Nie Tian and Yu Jingchen were too weak. With their current strength, it was impossible for them to break the sword formation. Since they could not use brute force, they could only use their wit. Nie Tian opened his demonic eye again and used his eye power to enter the sword formation. He carefully sensed the aura and flow of the sword inscriptions. He was so focused that he seemed to be in a meditative state. He stood there for a long time without moving. However, his forehead and body were already drenched in sweat. Activating the demonic eye consumed a lot of mental energy. Even Nie Tian had not used it for such a long time. After half a day, Yu Jingchen stood up. His complexion had recovered and he looked better. He was slightly stunned when he saw Nie Tian standing there motionlessly with sweat all over his body. He walked over and was shocked when he saw Nie Tian's eyes. Fresh blood flowed continuously from the corner of Nie Tian's eyes. The bright red blood had already flowed down to his chin. However, Nie Tian didn't seem to notice it at all. Yu Jingchen did not know what was going on, so he did not dare to disturb Nie Tian. He could only watch from the side. Soon, another half a day passed. Nie Tian finally walked out of his dazed state. His body swayed slightly as he let out a long breath. Nie Tian, how are you? Seeing that Nie Tian had finally reacted, Yu Jingchen immediately went forward and asked anxiously. Nie Tian wiped the blood and tears from the corners of his eyes and took a deep breath. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Instead of answering Yu Jingchen's question, he asked, Yu Jingchen, do you know the 9 styles of sword Dao? The 9 forms of the sword Dao? Yu Jingchen was stunned for a moment. Of course I know this. The 9 forms of the sword Dao. stab, hack, lift, hang, cloud, point, collapse, cut, and flower. This is the foundation of the sword Tao. It is a path that every swordsman must go through. The 9 forms of the sword Tao were also known as the 9 forms of the foundation. As the name suggested, they were the 9 most basic sword technique. Then tell me more about the 9 forms of the way of the sword. Nie Tian smiled faintly. No one knew what he was thinking. Yu Jingchen was even more confused, but he still said, thrusting the sword, erect the sword or level the sword and thrust it forward. The key is that the sword and the arm must be in a straight line. Only then can it be fast and accurate. Cleave the sword, erect the sword, cleave from top to bottom, the force reaches the body of the sword. The main point is, the sword should be from top to bottom, and force should be channeled through the sword. Raise the sword, erect the sword, lift it from the bottom to the top, and the force reaches the front of the sword. The main point is to use the curved sword to injure people. Hang the sword, erect the sword, the tip of the sword from the front up to the back, or from the front down to the back for hanging, and the force reaches the front of the sword. The main point is to carry a sword close to your body, and the edge of the sword can injure people. The cloud sword is a flat sword. Above or in front of the head is a circle of clouds. The key is to observe the sword with your eyes and move flexibly. Point the sword, erect the sword, lift the wrist, push the sword tip forward, and use the force to reach the sword tip. The main point is to lift the wrist, and the edge of the sword is like a blade. Collapse the sword, erect the sword, lower the wrist, push the sword tip forward, and use the force to reach the front and tip of the sword. The key is to lower the wrist, and use the force to reach the sword tip. Cut the sword is slanted upward or downward, and use the force to reach the front of the sword. The main point is, the sword is slanted, and the edge of the sword is not slanted. Flower the sword, with the wrist as the axis, erect the sword on both sides of the arm, forward and down, and form a circle around the body. The key is, the sword is close to the body, and there are swords all around the body. After that, Yu Jingchen looked at Nie Tian in confusion. He could not understand why Nie Tian would suddenly ask about such basic things. Well said. Nie Tian naturally understood Yu Jingchen's doubts. He smiled and said, actually, the true meaning of the profound insight sword Tao lies in 4 words: return to simplicity. Chapter 46-60. Xuedeshang stared at Nie Tian and Wan Minghai in shock. They wanted to fight against the entire 3 Extremes sect with just the 2 of them? Weren't they crazy? Although the 3 Extremes sect was only a faction of the heavenly martial sacred world, it was extremely powerful. In the entire all-heaven sacred world, only experts at the pinnacle of the heavenly martial realm could fight against the 3 Extremes sect alone. But it was obvious that Nie Tian's cultivation level was too low. It was unknown how far he was from the pinnacle of the heavenly martial realm. Although Wan Minghai's aura was somewhat strange, he did not seem to be an expert. Otherwise, he would not have allowed Nie Tian to fight alone when the 3 Extremes sect attacked previously. But now, the 2 of them wanted to fight the 3 Extremes sect head-on. Wasn't this crazy? Don't worry, Elder Xue. Although the 2 of us can't fight the 3 Extremes sect head-on, it shouldn't be difficult for us to leave. Of course, Nie Tian knew what Xuedeshang was thinking. Xuedeshang's eyes trembled slightly. He immediately understood and nodded. All right, I'll remove the defenses of the Zhongshuan land. You guys get ready. Nie Tian and Wan Minghai exchanged a glance as they watched Xuedeshang remove the defenses of the Zhongshuan land bit by bit. Roughly half an hour later, the defenses of the Zhongshuan land had weakened considerably. Rumble! It was at this moment that a tremendous rumble rang out. The entire Zhongshuan land violently shook as an invisible force spread across the sky. Nie Tian's pupils shrank. He already knew that the Zhongshuan gate had been broken. Xuedeshang and Yu Jingchen no longer hesitated and immediately entered the 9 Extremes sect. Lord Saint, I'll leave it to you. Nie Tian nodded solemnly as he looked at Wan Minghai. Wan Minghai did not speak and merely nodded. He also wanted to see how strong the experts of the all-heaven sacred world were. He had yet to truly fight against an expert ever since he entered the all-heaven sacred world. Just as Nie Tian finished speaking, several tyrannical auras rapidly approached from afar. The experts of the Three Extremes sect had arrived. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly. From afar, he could see that the leader of the countless Three Extremes Gate martial artists was a middle-aged man in white. His facial features were resolute, and his gaze was deep. He gave off a feeling that he was as steady as a mountain. An expert. Wan Minghai also felt the aura of the white-clothed man, and his expression changed. Based on his perception, the white-clothed man's aura was even stronger than that of Ouyang Chang'e, the vice-sect master of the Triple Extreme sect. In the blink of an eye, Sanji and the others arrived. Their imposing auras were like mountains, blotting out the sky and covering the earth, pressing down on Nie Tian and Wan Minghai. Wan Minghai took a small step forward, and a shield appeared around him, protecting him and Nie Tian. The majestic aura was like a tsunami, but when it came into contact with the barrier, there was no reaction at all. Space-time immortal art. Nie Tian immediately realized what was going on, and his heart was filled with astonishment. He had never expected that Wan Minghai would also know space-time celestial technique. Wan Minghai did not really fight against Sanji and the others. Instead, he used a space-time celestial technique to open up another layer of space to protect himself and Nie Tian. Good move. The white-clothed man obviously saw it too. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he was not angry. Instead, his lips curled into a faint smile. Then, the white-clothed man fixed his eyes on Nie Tian and said loudly, "I am Shangguan Hong, the sect master of the Three Extremes sect. You are Nie Tian, right?" "That's right." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and his aura locked onto Shangguan Hong as he replied indifferently. "With a cultivation of level 2 of Heaven Enlightenment Realm, you killed Ouyang Chang'e. No wonder the Sacred Pavilion wants to capture you." Shangguan Hong's eyes were sharp as he said in a deep voice. When he heard that Ouyang Chang'e had been killed by Nie Tian, he was extremely shocked. He knew Ouyang Chang'e's strength better than anyone else. In the entire heavenly martial sacred world, there were less than 5 people who could defeat Ouyang Chang'e. And Nie Tian was only a young martial artist. How could he have killed Ouyang Chang'e? After all, Nie Tian had just participated in the Hidden Dragon contest not long ago. Now that he had personally faced Nie Tian and confirmed that Nie Tian's cultivation was only in level 2 of Heaven Enlightenment Realm, Shangguan Hong was extremely shocked. He could not believe that a level 2 of Heaven Enlightenment Realm could kill an expert who was close to the peak of the heavenly martial arts realm. At this moment, he finally understood why the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion wanted Nie Tian's life. Without a doubt, even the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion felt threatened by Nie Tian, so they wanted to kill him. As expected, the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion is behind this. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he replied coldly. Nie Tian, if you are willing to return to the Sacred Pavilion with me, I can be merciful and let the remaining members of the Heavenly Martial Association go. The corners of Shangguan Hong's mouth twitched as his eyes were filled with coldness. Nie Tian, don't believe him. Without waiting for his voice to fade away, Wan Minghai immediately said. Nie Tian laughed and said loudly, "Shangguan Hong, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? Just based on the way you tried to exterminate the Heaven Martial Association, how could you be someone who would keep his promise? I will not go to the Heavenly Law Sacred Pavilion. Save your breath. Do you think the two of you can stop us?" Shangguan Hong's face darkened as he sneered. "Then we'll have to try." Nie Tian replied indifferently, not showing the slightest bit of fear. "Presumptuous." Shangguan Hong's eyes darkened as he let out a bellow. Immediately afterwards, He dashed towards Nie Tian and Wan Minghai at an extremely fast speed, like a streak of light. Watch out! In the blink of an eye, Wan Minghai sensed that something was wrong and cried out in alarm. He took a step forward and slapped out with his palm. Instantly, a mountain-toppling, sea-draining force exploded out toward Shangguan Hong. Bam! In the void, a muffled sound of an explosion could be heard. Suddenly, a violent wave spread out in all directions, engulfing everything in its path. Nie Tian was in the sublayer, but he could feel the violent waves. He retreated a few hundred meters before he managed to stabilize himself. So powerful! Looking at the raging waves, Nie Tian sucked in a breath of cold air with a grim look in his eyes. He did not expect the first exchange between Shangguan Hong and Wan Minghai to be so powerful. If Wan Minghai had not acted in time, the sublayer would have been shattered instantly, and the two of them would have been crushed into meat paste. The strength of the triple extreme sex leader, Shangguan Hong, was much stronger than Nie Tian had expected. However, Wan Minghai was also very powerful. He did not seem to be at a disadvantage when facing Shangguan Hong head-on. What kind of strength is this? Shangguan Hong asked in astonishment as he steadied himself after the violent waves dispersed. He stared coldly at Wan Minghai. He had been in the martial world for hundreds of thousands of years and had seen countless powers. However, he had never seen a power like Wan Minghai's. Of course, he did not know that Wan Minghai was not from the all-heaven sacred world, but an immortal cultivator. If you want to know, you'll have to defeat me first. Wan Minghai's lips curled into a smile as he spoke. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable excitement. He really wanted to fight against a martial cultivator, and Shangguan Hong was the perfect candidate. Chapter 46-61. Facing Shangguan Hong, Wan Minghai was full of battle intent. His celestial force surged around him, unleashing an overwhelming aura. Very well. Shangguan Hong's eyes were filled with murderous intent. It was the first time he had been challenged like this. As the sect leader of the Sanji sect, although he was not as strong as the top experts in the sacred world, he was definitely one of the top 3 in the heavenly martial sacred world. Although he did not know much about Wan Minghai, he had absolute confidence in his own strength. He would definitely win this battle. Everyone, listen up. Without my order, no one is allowed to make a move. Shangguan Hong bellowed. His eyes were filled with killing intent. After so many years, he also wanted to fight to his heart's content. Yes. Everyone responded in unison, their voices as loud as the mountains and the seas. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he retreated a few thousand meters. A battle between the top experts of the celestial path and martial path was exciting. Come on, let me see what you're capable of. Shangguan Hong's aura was extremely strong. The origin energy around him surged. He was like a hurricane, causing the surrounding space to emit strange noises. It's enough to defeat you. Wan Minghai's lips curled up. He was not afraid at all. He took a step forward, and a giant seal appeared under his feet. Runes were flowing around it, and mysterious celestial force spread out in all directions like ripples. Wherever the celestial seal's power passed, time and space seemed to change, and a unique state appeared. It was as if time and space had been changed, and it was in a state between liquid and gas. It looked extremely strange. I have never seen such power before. Who are you? Shangguan Hong faintly felt his aura being suppressed. He could not help but be shocked. He was not shocked by Wan Minghai's powerful aura, but by the latter's unique aura. He had met countless opponents in his life, and many of them had strange powers. However, no one was like Wan Minghai, who had a complete understanding of the attribute of power. As long as one practiced the martial path, although the attribute of power was different, it was the same. No matter how strange one's power was, it still belonged to the 9 origin. However, Wan Minghai's power did not seem to belong to the 9 origin. It was too strange. Immortal art, mountain and river shaking palm. Right at that moment, Wan Minghai directly made his move. With a low shout, the celestial seal beneath his feet spun madly, and waves of incomparably powerful celestial force gathered. With a slap of his palm, the celestial seal turned into a palm silhouette formed by countless celestial marks. With an overwhelming momentum, it pressed down on Shangguan Hong. In an instant, Shangguan Hong felt a terrifying pressure coming from above his head, causing his expression to change as he cried out in surprise. He did not expect Wan Minghai's explosive power to be so terrifying. The expressions of the people from Three Extremes sect also changed. Many of them involuntarily retreated. 10,000 dragons holding the sky. However, Shangguan Hong was someone who had been through hundreds of battles after all. His own strength was not weak either. With a low shout, the aura around his body surged. He raised his hand to the sky, and countless dragon shadows whizzed out from the void, blocking the enormous palm shadows. Dragon tribe. When Ye Tian saw this, his eyes narrowed and he was shocked. He couldn't tell that Shangguan Hong was a member of the Dragon Clan. The experts of the Dragon Clan had extremely strong martial bodies. Coupled with the powerful dragon veins in their bodies, under the same cultivation level, they were usually stronger than ordinary martial artists. However, Shangguan Hong's dragon veins seemed to be a little different from other experts of the Dragon Clan. The aura was not obvious, as if it was incomplete. Bang! At that moment, a loud explosion was heard, and the surging power wreaked havoc in the void. Wan Minghai and Shangguan Hong retreated at the same time, and then stabilized themselves at the same time. The two of them fought for the first time, and their strength was actually on par. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the people from Three Extremes sect in the distance, secretly looking for a way to escape. Based on the current situation, even if Wan Minghai defeated Shangguan Hong, they could not fight against Three Extremes sect head-on. Nye Tian calculated that after Wan Minghai defeated Shangguan Hong or gained the upper hand, he would rush out before the people from Three Extremes sect could react. However, it would not be easy for Wan Minghai to defeat Shangguan Hong. Then, Wan Minghai and Shangguan Hong exchanged 3 more blows, and again they were on par. Very good, very good. Shangguan Hong's eyes flashed with killing intent as he said in a deep voice, I did not expect the Heaven Martial Association to be hiding an expert like you. I have underestimated you guys. Wan Minghai was in the Tsangshuan land, so it was normal for Shangguan Hong to think of him as a member of the Heaven Martial Association. You're not bad yourself to be able to last so long against me. Wan Minghai smiled faintly. The immortal runes around his body flowed even faster, and the aura of immortal qi enveloped the surrounding tens of thousands of meters. Shangguan Hong clearly felt the change in the aura of the surrounding space. He frowned slightly as an ominous feeling rose in his heart. The corners of Wan Minghai's mouth rose into a faint smile as he confidently said, Shangguan Hong, it's time to end this battle. Is that so? Shangguan Hong let out an icy chuckle, but his expression soon changed. He suddenly sensed a strange force surging out from the void around him. It was as if thousands of invisible hands were sealing the space around him. How is this possible? Shangguan Hong's face paled in shock. His aura had already spread several thousand meters away, and he had already firmly sealed the surrounding space. How could Wan Minghai have taken advantage of it? You've only realized it now? Wan Minghai sneered. My immortal runes had already invaded the surrounding space while we were fighting. They're only temporarily dormant, waiting for the moment to erupt. So that's how it is. Shangguan Hong finally understood, but his eyes were bloodshot without the slightest fear. It's already too late to realize it now. Wan Minghai smiled faintly as he made a grabbing motion in the air. Countless immortal runes moved simultaneously, pressing down on the surrounding space, causing it to emit a low groan. Sect Master. The expressions of the 3G sect members changed when they felt the disturbance in space. They cried out in unison, but they did not know what to do. Was the sect master, who was almost invincible in their eyes, going to be defeated just like that? Do you think it's possible to defeat me with such power? Shangguan Hong roared. His body shook as a surge of dragon qi burst forth. Immediately, his body seemed as if it was about to explode as it expanded unceasingly. In the blink of an eye, under countless gazes, Shangguan Hong turned into a giant dragon that was as dark as the night. His body was nearly 1,000 meters long, and he looked like he could devour the sky. Bang! The giant dragon of darkness shook violently in the air, and the immortal runes in the space-time directly shattered, turning into immortal force and dissipating. The 3G sect members were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. They all gasped and were completely speechless. They never knew that their sect master could be so powerful. 9 Candle Dragon. Nie Tian stared at the giant dragon of darkness, his eyes trembling slightly as he uttered these 3 words in a deep voice.